24th Planning and Sustainability Commission. We now are going to have the Transportation Systems Plan hearing. First, for people that wish to testify, if you fill out a testimony card that's back in the hall, you will have 2 minutes to provide your information. The green, yellow, red, when the red light comes on, your testimony is finished. I will call up 3 at a time for your testimony, and we will listen to your testimony. We'll have a introduction by Director Treat to start us, and then we will have a staff presentation around the Transportation Systems Plan, and then we'll have a few comments about the presentation, and then we'll go into public testimony, and then we'll conclude the public testimony with a kind of a wrap up. We're not making a decision today, just final kind of closing comments, short, because we've been here a long time by that time, and then we'll be done. This will close the oral testimony for the comprehensive plan TSP part. However, you still can do written testimony through March 13th, 2015, if you wish to provide further testimony. So with that, we'll start with Director Treat and her opening comments. Welcome to the Planning and Sustainability Commission. Turn on your mic.
Here we go. Can you hear me all right now? Great. Thank you. This is the first time that I've met several of you, so I appreciate the invitation to be here tonight. And I realized as I walked around the room introducing myself, I actually only knew 3 of you. So maybe I'll start off a little bit telling you just a small piece about myself, so you can get to know me as a person better before I launch into a little bit of the testimony about our TSP draft recommendations. I've been in Portland for 18 months. I moved here from the city of Chicago, and I have 4 young children. So my husband and I moved here, and this was a really exciting opportunity for us. And the decision to take this job as the transportation director in the city of Portland was not one that we made very lightly. We had moved to the city of Chicago just 2 years prior and had uprooted our children just 2 years ago. And so it was a very engaging conversation that we had, but one that we went into with intention. And the reason that we decided to move here is for Portland. We absolutely love this city, and the fact that I was selected and offered this job is nothing more than awesome and humbling to me, and I am tremendously excited to be serving in my role as Director of Transportation, and I feel like the values that I have for sustainability, for healthy living, for equity, for prosperity for all is values that align with this city, and was really the driving factor in my taking that job, and it's the values that I bring to my work every day. And I think that dovetails very nicely into the conversation for tonight and our draft recommendations for the TSP. Broadly, the recommendations that we are making make known in a very public manner that we are committed to an equitable and prosperous city, and that we are well aligned with the Portland Plan, the Comprehensive Plan, the Draft Climate Action Plan, and the programs for centers and corridors. And we are especially committed to serving areas with the most gaps and deficiencies and the greatest underserved populations. And consistent with these plans are also my goals for my organization. In the shorter term, I had staff pass out to you earlier. This is a document that was just published a few weeks ago. It's called Portland Progress, and this is a 2-year plan for my bureau of the actionable items that we're going to be working on over the next 2 years. And the reason I thought this was really relevant is even though it's a 2-year plan and the TSP is a much longer range plan, this actually outlines the beginning steps of our work towards the TSP that you'll be hearing about. And there's 2 chapters in here that I think fit quite nicely into our work in the draft recommendations. And it's the chapter on Vision Zero and the chapter on equity. So I was going to talk about Vision Zero first. Vision Zero is a philosophy that one death on our roadways is too many. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me point you to the page. I should know. Here we go. So you can start on. Oh, we did number of pages. That's awesome. Yeah. So I can't tell you where it's in midway through.
37.
There's some pages at the bottom.
Maybe just the page we're looking at.
You got the. I didn't get
37.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the assistance. So the page where it starts not numbered. Once you get into the chapter, the numbering picks up. Anyway, all right, everybody with me? Okay. Anyway, so Vision Zero, it's really a philosophy that deaths on our street are avoidable. And it's a mindset that's asking us to change our culture. It's asking us to change our streets. We don't accept that it's okay for people to die or be seriously injured on our streets. And it's our shared responsibility to create streets and create communities where it's safe for everyone to walk, bike, skate, scoot, roll, use an assisted mobility device, and even drive a car. So those are all the goals in Vision Zero. We use Vision Zero as a tool within our Bureau to evaluate all the major projects that we are putting forward, and our investment recommendations are full of projects that are both large and small, but they all have a focused attention on saving lives, increasing the diversity of people who feel safe walking, cycling, and taking transit. And the second important theme that I wanted to talk about was equity. So for the first time, to my knowledge, the transportation investment recommendations reflect an equity lens. All 290 projects coming forth from my bureau were programs that were evaluated and given a score on a range of +3 to -1, reflecting the degree to which they benefit seniors, youth, people of color, and low-income communities. I'd also like to share that yesterday, we just opened a recruitment for an equity and inclusion manager for the Bureau of Transportation. That position will be reporting directly to me, and that person will be helping us institutionalize equity into all of our work. I point that out because I want you to know and believe that equity is an incredibly important issue to me, and I'm institutionalizing it in our Bureau. Finally, the 2 important actions in both Portland Progress and our TSP investment recommendations are Bike Share. We are going to launch Bike Share in 2016. I'm excited to announce this. I can't get into any details, but there will be a launch in 2016. Bike Share is exciting to me because it is shown to close the gender gap in cycling. It's shown to be a last-mile connector to our transit system. It's shown to increase support for local businesses and increase the person carrying capacity in a dense transit network. And also, I want to talk just briefly about parking. Last year, I directed my staff to start working on developing advisory committees to overhaul citywide parking strategies. We are working on creating a toolkit that we will deploy in different areas of the city. The first will be the central city, with the goals of supporting businesses by turnover, decreasing conflicts in neighborhoods by reducing parking demand, addressing loading zones and goods delivery. And then we want to support policies to increase the number of people who are walking, biking, taking transit trips, improving their health, reducing spending on fuel, and cut climate pollution. So as the PSC, I appreciate your commitment to ensuring our transportation policies and investments support the values and goals that will keep Portland a great place to live, play, and do business. I cannot stay for the entirety of the evening, but I have Peter Hurley with me to talk about recommended policies, projects, and programs, Mark Lear to talk about our financial plan, and Art Pierce to talk about our analysis of the investments and public involvement. And in closing, I want to say thank you And thank you to our TSP team and our TEG members who are here tonight for their service to Portland Bureau of Transportation and to this great city. And I thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a couple of
Yeah,
comments.
just
Mike?
a quick comment. Don't disagree with any of your objectives or your priorities. The street system represents about 40% of the land area in the city. And one of the things that I've enjoyed seeing is more inter-bureau cooperation with the Bureau of Environmental Services and Parks and PBOT with regard to addressing stormwater issues, urban heat island. They're all any number of cooperative projects that have been occurring between the bureaus. I noticed Lidman Rahman from ODOT specifically pointed out the fact that they appreciate the fact that you're trying to achieve multiple policy objectives, and I just want to throw out that I'm hopeful that we see even more cooperation between BES and PBOT and Parks to address those environmental issues as well.
Thank you.
Chris, and then Howard.
Well, that excitement about bike share, that announcement of bike share is very exciting. I'm glad that we're finally getting that moving. But primarily, I want to thank you for your championship of Vision Zero. Vision Zero is something of a national and international movement, and it's kind of gaining momentum pretty much as you arrived here in Portland, and I'm glad that you've provided the spark to get it moving here, and I want to thank you and your staff for beefing up the policy language in the TSP around that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Howard?
I note in the book that was just given us that New York City has a vision of zero agenda, and I've experienced what's happened in New York that's been dramatic and dynamic in the way things have changed. Do you believe that your agenda is bold and audacious like they're claiming? How do you compare the two? How do you make that work?
Thank you. I'm a little more modest than that. I think we are setting off on a very bold and audacious agenda. It's taking a tremendous amount of collaboration and partnerships that we are having to build internally within the Bureau and the support from the mayor and the commissioners. I will point out there's a very different form of government here than there is in New York. And so to me, I think given the form of government, I think it is incredibly bold and audacious, and it's just as daring as New York's plan is, and we are just bringing everyone along with us as we head in that direction. You're welcome.
Any other comments for Director? Thank you for appearing. Yeah, welcome.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for appearing before us, and hopefully you come back.
I would welcome the opportunity. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Three of us will be speaking this evening about the Bureau's recommendations.
Your name?
I am Peter Hurley, and I will be talking about the policies, the projects, and the programs. Mark Lear will be talking about the financial plan, and Art Pierce will be talking about an analysis of the projects, programs, and finances, as well as public involvement and next steps. So the transportation policy piece, I'm going to cover this very quickly because you held a hearing on this back on November 4th and took testimony on it. We covered the policies in the draft comprehensive plan chapters 3, 4, 8, and 9. And we will be providing, at least we are intending, to provide some minor updates to you prior to your vote on this segment of the transportation system plan, but those will be pretty minor. So the vast majority of the policy language you've already seen and you've taken testimony on. I would also like to mention some caveats about this update of the transportation system plan. It's our first update since 2007. And what we've done is to look for potential projects in the plans that have been adopted since 2007. There are 19 of those, and we spent a lot of time scouring those plans to identify projects. But of course, that doesn't identify the universe of projects that are needed. There is going to be a process before the next TSP, the 2040 TSP, where we will be doing some planning and identifying projects, both large and small, that will be incorporated into that update as well. Some of the things that we're aware of that frustrate us as much as they frustrate members of the public and perhaps yourselves as well are some of the project descriptions are fairly vague. Some of them are more focused on the need. Some of them are more focused on the solution, and we're trying to update project costs as part of this, but with 281 major projects, it's an ongoing process. So that's something that we realize needs some additional work. We also anticipate doing some work on the economic benefit component. That's somewhat vague. There are a number of economic benefit means different things to different people. For some folks, it's access to family wage jobs. For others, it's freight access or revitalization, all of which we've incorporated into our evaluation process. But that's something that both the region and the city have some work to do between now and the next transportation system plan. And perhaps most importantly, there are a lot of great projects and great programs in the plan. You've heard over the last couple of years about the limited funding situation we're in. You're going to see in some detail what the implication of those limited funds are. It has a significant impact, and as much as we're going to talk about whether projects should be on the constrained or the unconstrained list, and the first 10 years or the second 10 years, what the limiting factor in this is funding, and we have a pretty ambitious funding, what we call a realistically aggressive revenue forecast that Mark Lear will be talking about. The only way we're going to achieve the outcomes in this plan are with sufficient revenues. So I'm going to talk specifically about the major projects and the citywide programs that are part of this plan. One of the things we needed to do in order to identify what are the projects and programs that we're recommending is go through a process to determine what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve. We've made many promises in the various plans we've adopted over the years, from the Portland Plan to the Climate Action Plan. And how is it that we're going to achieve those with a limited amount of money? We needed to look at a candidate list of projects, evaluate those projects, match the revenues with the projects and programs. And the last step, the one that we're in the midst of right now, is modeling the performance of the system. This is less linear. This approach is actually, even though it's shown as a linear approach, it really is more of a loop where when you get to each of those steps, there's been some feedback that's provided, and we will, at the end of this, once we look at the performance, we'll have some recommendations that will loop back on potential projects and policies that may need to be incorporated into the next plan, or some changes, perhaps, in some of the outcome targets that we've established. So think of this more as a loop, even though it's shown as linear. The first of those steps, and perhaps one of the most important ones, is to identify what are the outcomes we're attempting to achieve. We spent a lot of time a couple of years ago going through a range of plans: the Portland Plan, the Regional Transportation Plan, the State Transportation Planning Rule, the Freight, Bike, and Pedestrian Plans, the Climate Action Plan, to identify what are the things that the state, the region, and the city have said we are going to do. The 70% mode share, non-drive alone mode share target, the 28% reduction in per capita greenhouse gas emissions from transportation options, the prosperity targets, the equity targets. We went through and we identified 7 consistent outcomes across those, and you'll see those there. I'm not going to read them. I suspect you're quite familiar with those, but this is really the foundation upon which much of our analysis occurred, identifying these outcomes and then evaluating projects and programs and policies to see how they would achieve these outcomes. The second step then was developing the candidate list. As I mentioned earlier, we took a look at the 19 plans that have been adopted since 2007. What are the projects that those contain? Because those had gone through a public vetting process, a public prioritization process of one type or another, and pulled the major projects from those plans and put them onto a larger list. We also took a look at the 2014 Regional Transportation Plan. What are the projects that the city and other agencies identified within the city of Portland? We also identified a need for something called citywide programs. I'm going to spend a bit of time on this because I think this is very important, and this is something we've heard a lot of feedback from the public on as well. A lot of times the projects that we focused on historically are the big ones, the more expensive ones that can do a lot of good in a corridor. But what we hear in many neighborhoods and business districts is the crossing at a certain intersection would really make a difference in safety, in achieving that Vision Zero goal that the director talked about. Could make a big difference in providing access to a new industrial site, for example. So we identified many small projects under $500,000. Many of them had languished over the years because it doesn't make a lot of sense to write a grant for a $30,000 project or a $2,000 project. We actually had a $2,000 project in the previous TSP. So those types of things just weren't rising to the top and weren't getting done. So we decided that to improve the likelihood that these small, important projects get done, that we would bundle them into citywide programs and look at ongoing funding, in part from the city, but in many cases from grant programs to identify a potential ongoing funding source. And this is going to be a key piece of whether or not these programs succeed, is whether or not there's sufficient funding. So our intent is to identify a lot of small projects from things like the Bike Master Plan, Head Master Plan, the Freight Plan, and bring those into the citywide programs. The programs that I will get into some detail on what they are. We evaluated both the programs and the projects based on how they would achieve those 7 outcomes. We used 11 criteria. 4 of them are economic benefit criteria. There's one for each of the others in there, as well as a very important one, which is public support. So we're actually giving a score to projects based on the level of neighborhood support, business support, advisory committee support. And we vetted this through the Transportation Expert Group, our advisory committee, over an 11-month process. The 4th step then was, once we had identified the various projects and programs and had come up with a score for those, is to match those projects and programs to the revenue sources. Mark Lear is going to go into detail on each of these, but this is a really important step in the process because sometimes you can find funding for a project that, even if it's not at the top of the list, if we have funding for it and we've identified it as something important to the system, we are going to go after that funding. The result then is in the recommendation packet in front of you, that thick packet that you have, is a tier of projects and programs. That first tier are the financially constrained, the ones that we think, if we are able to achieve a realistically aggressive revenue forecast, we can pay for over the next 20 years. There are 201 major projects and the 9 citywide programs in that list, in that financially constrained list. We're required to identify that by the state as part of the Transportation System Plan update. There are 80 other major projects that are important and valuable, but we don't believe that without significant additional revenue that we'll be able to afford. So those are on the important but unconstrained list. We've also identified a number of very important studies that need to occur, and those are on a draft studies list. The draft studies list is going to be updated before you take your vote because there are a number of studies that we're in the process of scoping at this point in time, determining, determining what the timing and the scope of the study is likely to be. But those are going to be an important part of preparing for the next transportation system plan. There's also a pretty impressive list of projects that have already been funded. They haven't been completed, but they're in the construction process. It's about $17 million worth of freight projects, for example, that are in the pipeline to be completed over the next 3 years. And then finally, there are other agency projects, important projects by Multnomah County, TriMet, the Port of Portland, and the Oregon Department of Transportation. We did not evaluate those projects. Our intent is to work with the agencies over the next several years to identify what our common priorities are in preparation for the next transportation system plan and the next regional transportation plan. So what does it look like? What are some of the projects that are in here? And this is just 9 projects in various parts of the city that are very important that ended up in that tier that we're recommending the first 10 years that we pursue. Projects like the 122nd Avenue corridor improvements. These are multimodal improvements, improvements that should benefit all modes of transportation. Similarly for Southwest Barber, Outer Division, Stark and Washington, North Lombard. And then there are a series of freight projects, and these are, of course, partial lists as well. The ITS improvements, the Transportation System Management or Intelligent Transportation System, these are the relatively low-cost improvements that we can target to move freight more quickly in a corridor, all the way to the Rivergate Boulevard overcrossing. Important project for access to new industrial lands, something that is a very important part of the comprehensive plan. The other result were these citywide programs. I mentioned earlier that we had identified 9 citywide programs, some of which already exist, like Safe Routes to School and High Crash Corridors, others of which would be new programs like Freight Priority and Transit Priority. How do we ensure that we're moving those high-value trips, the highest value trips, more quickly in our system? And there are budgets associated with those. Some of those are pretty significant amounts of money that we'll need to come up with funding for. And then finally, the last step is modeling performance. We've already, we have a baseline run. We're in the process now of the second run of the model to determine just how much benefit there is from the draft projects and programs in your recommendation. We should have some results that we should be able to talk about on March 10th at the work session that you're holding then. Mark Lear is going to be talking about the fun stuff, where we're going to get the money to pay for all of these.
Before you go to Mark, could I ask Peter what assumption the project list makes about the status of orphan highways?
So it's a question that is both in the financial plan in a fairly significant way. We aren't making an assumption about who is going to make improvements. We identified some improvements that need to be made, whether it's on a state highway or a city facility. We've been attempting to identify those. For Barber is an example, 82nd is another example of that.
And well, let me just talk about it right now. One of the things you'll see in the financial chapter, again, Mark Lear, Portland Bureau of Transportation, is we have a new revenue source called Orphan Highways. It has $100 million in it. And we were actually having this conversation exactly like you're talking about, because there's been probably too much of between the City of Portland and Oregon Department of Transportation on some of these facilities where ODOT may own the facility or has been transferred to us, a sort of, difficulty in figuring out, who's kind of in that lead position. And so we decided in this update to include $100 million. It's of additional revenue from a state program. Right now in the Oregon Transportation Forum proposal, it's in front of the state legislature. There's this idea of taking revenue from 1 cent, which would generate $26 million a year. If you extend that out over the life of a 20-year program and then allocate back to the city sort of our share based on crashes, we assume that there'd be about $100 million. So we're really trying to think, with being good partners with ODOT as well, of showing that money in our, or that revenue in our proposal and using it as a way to try to build some more stronger partnerships between us and the state on those important facilities. great segue into
I
this part of the
can say, Chris,
presentation.
that it is an area that probably needs some additional work, and I think both the state and the city recognize that through collaboration we can identify improvements that will be needed.
So I have a quick question as well. You had that diagram with, I believe it was 7 different priority areas that help you establish your plan. Go back right there. Evaluation criteria. How are you weighing? Are you weighing all of those equally? And if so, I'm a little I'm concerned that that weighing economic benefit and cost effectiveness may overwhelm priorities of equity. In addition, what is the definition of cost effective, how you're evaluating these projects? Because if you're using a traditional cost benefit analysis, I don't see how that's really going to help those populations that are historically underserved and disadvantaged. If we're comparing it to siting maybe a waste incinerator, of course it's going to be sited in a community of color if you're using a traditional cost benefit analysis. So how can you?
Great questions. And
assuage my
actually, this is
fears?
one of the reasons that we decided to do this process so that we could actually identify, for example, one of the things that's in there, you'll see an equity criterion. We were able to evaluate all 281 projects, major projects, based on the extent to which they are likely to benefit seniors, youth, people of color, and low-income individuals based on the census data that we have. So as a result, we were able to then look across at the list of projects that we have in the end and say, did we actually achieve what we were attempting to do, which is to provide substantial benefit to those communities based on the projects and programs that are in our recommendation. So go ahead if you want to. I was going to get to the cost effectiveness piece as well.
Yeah, so I was just going to follow it. You might touch on that, but if it's an economic benefit to the city as a whole or the neighborhoods as a whole, or those communities.
So I'll talk to the economic benefit and the cost effectiveness components there. And just to take a step back, your first question was around how did we weight these? We didn't weight these because all of these showed up in the plans. What we are attempting to do, which I think is unique and actually quite valuable, you'll see a slide a little bit later on that shows how the vast majority of the projects and programs in our recommendation achieve multiple benefits. So they're good for health, they're good for low-income and underserved communities, they're good for neighborhood access, 20-minute access to family wage jobs, for example. Those are the projects that are going to provide great benefit and be cost effective. So for economic benefit, we evaluated projects for 4 criterion: the ability to provide access to higher education and family wage jobs, the ability to provide freight access and freight mobility, and the ability to revitalize business districts. So those are the economic benefit criteria. We then, of course, did these others for safety, for neighborhood access, for health, increasing physical activity, for greenhouse gas emissions, and, of course, for equity. Cost effectiveness was basically taking all of those and dividing by a band of cost. And the cost ranged from $2,000 for the smallest project up to, I think, $1.5 billion at the high end. So what we didn't do, and I've been critical of traditional cost-benefit analysis for quite some time. What we didn't do is just attempt to monetize. What we did do is give value to all of these criteria.
So, Mike, you had a question. I just want to be real quick. No, Howard? Nope. Okay, I want to be real quick because we're getting behind schedule, and so can we move on?
Let's keep moving. All right.
I raised my eyebrow.
Some of this we'll get to at the end as well. So,
And I'll go a little bit at higher level to get through this. We wanted to give you this one little bit complicated slide to show you what the steps were that we went through in putting together the finance plan. The first step is we look at the 17 existing funding sources. We have a lot of help in this because the Regional Transportation Plan just went through this. We pretty much use their financial assumptions unless we think they're a little bit too aggressive or there's some new information. And then we also identified 10 new funding sources, a mix of federal, state, local resources. The second step is that we develop the 3 funding forecasts like we've talked about. Existing revenues is that assumption similar to what's in the RTP, that your existing revenues continue to keep pace with inflation, continue to provide that same buying power that they buy today. And then we have a constrained revenue goal, which I'll show you in a minute, some of the different revenue assumptions that are included in that. That's our reasonable assumption. And then we have an unconstrained revenue, which is a more aggressive, optimistic, that allows us to continue to look at what might be possible with probably a little bit more unrealistic revenue assumptions. The third step, and it's actually a new one, I worked on the last update of the TSP finance plan like 7 years ago, and this is a new piece for us. And hopefully what we can get out of this looking at additional funding restrictions is start to have a little better sense of what revenue is probably going to be tied up for certain kind of projects. Or for example, streetcar, we're looking at a little bit differently. There's a small starts program that could be available for streetcar. We're basically saying if we're going to do another streetcar project, that would be a funding source, and that there'd be some other non-most discretionary revenue that would be available for match. So we can provide a little bit more of a guide of what that revenue is available and what that might be. Similar under freight. We've also really made, I think, a lot of progress in understanding how much of our revenue in our transportation system plan is coming from development-related costs. This includes things like system development charges that a lot of us are aware of, but it also includes a lot of things like when projects are built to code, they end up building a lot of improvements that otherwise would have to be done as part of a project. So we're looking at that a little more closely as well. The fourth step is that process of using the criteria that Peter just described in detail to come up with a constrained list of projects and programs and an unconstrained. And right now, that list that you're looking at is pretty much driven by 2 factors: that criteria that Peter talked about and some projects that we know are funded. So those would also be in the constrained. What it doesn't do, and will happen in this 5th step that's just currently we're sort of kicking off now, is to start to refine. We know that the criteria is really useful. It looks like it is so far, but we also have a sense that there's going to be some projects that maybe only score really well in one criteria, but are really important for the system. Or there may be some funding source that's out there a little bit that we're pretty sure is going to be available to that. So the next few months, we're going to be doing a couple different things. We're going to be doing additional modeling and analysis, which I'll be talking about in a little bit more. We'll continue to talk with different agencies, like I was talking about just a second ago, with ODOT to try to figure out how we can better coordinate some of those pieces, and then getting feedback from the Planning and Sustainability Commission is obviously a big part of how we're going to process this as well. So this is a snapshot of those 3 different funding scenarios. I just want to talk a little bit about sort of the biggest differences when you look at what happens when you go from the existing to the constrained. And what really happens here is you see the biggest increase in those colored bars is the change between in the local funding stream. It goes from $416 million over the 20-year period to $751 million. And it's driven primarily by 3 different funding mechanisms. The first one is the Portland Street Fund. That conversation that we're having over the last few months, the Our Streets effort, right now our assumption is that would generate about $270 million over the 20-year period. So that's a big part of that additional well over half of that additional $500 million that you see between the existing and constrained. It's also, when you looked at that slide earlier that showed how much money was available for high crash corridors and safe routes to schools, we're taking those commitments that we made in the public as we were talking about the Our Street Portland Street Fund effort, where we committed money to building out projects in East Portland in motion and making much bigger commitments to high crash corridors and safe routes. We're using those commitments to sort of drive how much money is in those different programs, which I think is really useful, and it's also going to help because people are going to see those projects on those project lists as they look at some of those citywide programs and start to understand what that means. In addition, there's the $100 million that I was talking earlier to Chris Smith about, for orphan highways. I think this is really going to be a great opportunity with this transportation system plan to join in that conversations that's happening at the federal and the state and the local level about how we address these really important streets, and in a revenue source that people are actually talking about to move forward with that. In addition, there's $87 million from $15 vehicle registration fee increase. The last slide that I have for you is one related to freight revenue. in the constrained revenue scenario. And what I wanted to highlight here is there's been some confusion, I think, a little bit about how much revenue is available for freight projects, what freight projects are we showing in the plan. And what this slide highlights is that when we looked at the historic spending on freight programs for locally led projects, and again, what we're showing in the TSP, I should have said this earlier, is we're highlighting the locally led projects. That $1.3 billion doesn't include the revenue that's going for projects owned by other agencies. It's our locally led projects.
Or maintenance.
Yeah, or maintenance. It's also major capital work. So right now, if we look at historic spending for freight on our locally led projects for major capital, it's about $108 million a year. In addition to that, if we look at
20 years.
Sorry, 100. Yeah, thank you. I wish. When we look at the new revenue streams that we show in the constrained that Oregon's cost responsibility weight mile would apply to, where 34.5% of costs are attributed back to trucks, we assume that would generate about another $88 million over the 20-year time horizon. That chart is slashed because part of what we want to highlight there is a lot of that money potentially would go to maintenance, but it could, and I think freight would make a strong argument that it would go to freight projects. So that's just under $200 million of revenue that we've identified for freight projects. The next bar chart next to this is $216 million, which is how much the total of the project costs that are included in the constraints. So right now, that's a pretty close balance. In addition to that, we wanted to highlight that when you look at the whole TSP and you look at those projects that are owned by other agencies, that total actually is $737 million. Just to sort of put it in perspective, that freight is super important to this plan, as Art will be talking about more, especially access to industrial sites is something that we really want to pay attention to in this plan. And so far, at least, it seems like we have a pretty good balance as far as the revenues and expenditures.
So again, Art Pierce, Bureau of Transportation. So I'm going to take us through a little walk of some initial analysis of what's in this list, if you sort of slice it lots of different ways. And I've asked staff a lot of questions in the last month or so, mostly, on coming to or heading back from work, an idea occurs to me and I write down a note, and then the next morning I've asked them to slice it a new way. And in part, so hopefully I've asked some of the questions. You may have additional analysis, and some of those things are things that we could do between now and your March work session if there's additional questions that you have about, how does the list look? You'll also remember I was using a metaphor around we're making a soup, we're making a recipe last time I was here. This is our first taste of that recipe. We'll hear feedback from many people that there's missing ingredients or it's too strong on certain ingredients. That's all a healthy part of making the right recipe, and those are changes that are welcomed to be discussed from your feedback and from the community feedback. So this is all part of the process. So one of the first pieces, and this is I think one that certainly Peter and Mark are pretty excited about, what you see in blue here is the number of criteria that projects, the blue and orange, excuse me, are the number of projects in the constrained list that met criteria. So you see at the top on the left there is the number of criteria that they meet between 0 criteria and 9 of those criteria that we discussed earlier. And the number, if you look at the number of projects on the horizontal axis, what you'll see is that most of the projects that made it into the constrained list meet multiple criteria, meaning that they are able to address health, equity, economic benefit, a variety of elements. And the ones that are recommended to be either sort of heading down toward the unconstrained list, or the ones that are in orange, met less multiple benefits. And so we think that that's a good way, at least at a starting point. If you're going to try to address needs, let's not address one with each project. Let's address with a project multiple outcomes that we want to see happen.
Could I just ask you a question?
Oh, sure, yeah.
If something meets 0 criteria, why would it even be on the list?
That's a valid question. You'll see that the ones that meet, there are 4 projects that met 0 criteria, and they're not recommended to be on the constrained list. We are at this point not recommending those to be not on the TSP altogether, but that is feedback that you could give us if you wanted to. Right? Yep. So one of the feedbacks that we certainly are aware of, and one of the things that we're tracking is how does this investment strategy support the overall plan for the comprehensive plan? How does this support the growth that we are wanting to see happen? How does this produce the community attributes that we're wanting to see happen? Because that's really what the transportation system plan is. It's an investment strategy to support that future that we're trying to strive for. This graphic is mostly meant to be illustrative, but we can actually go through and, if you wanted to, talk about what are the specific projects that are sort of captured in each of these locations, if that's useful to understand what the attributes of some of those projects are. Yes, go ahead. Karen? Yeah.
So this is kind of hitting on something that I made a mark for myself to come back to with you.
Okay.
Is in the document, it's got unpaved streets and it's got high crash corridors, and then it has a map of the projects. And I didn't know if at some point you have an overlay of those three together. So what I'm getting at is you have a map of where the crashes are, you have a map of where the paved and unpaved roads are, and you actually have that semi by race, by demographic, which is very interesting in itself. And then you have the projects on a graph.
Sure, we can certainly overlay those.
I'm curious if you have an overlay of that, because what it looks like, to my eye, is that the crashes in the unpaved areas don't match where the project majorities are.
Okay.
So I would love to be able to see that differently.
You bet. And so some of them, these are sort of two different things. I think you're referencing in this document, in the Portland Progress document. Okay, yeah, so I just want to make sure that everyone else was following. So the projects are in the TSP and Portland Progress. What we would be doing is putting those two together. Right, okay, okay.
Isn't this part of
This is, we hope we didn't confuse you too much. I apologize for this. This is something that the Bureau is releasing that is not specifically the part of the TSP recommendation, but it is certainly part of what the Bureau is working on. Leo, because she was here talking with you, wanted to make sure she highlighted it for you, but it is not part of the official proposed TSP plan. This is more near-term actions the Bureau is undertaking. In fact, it even includes in here, finish the TSP. So it's more of near-term things that we need to be taking on, including what we're doing here tonight, but it is not specifically the investment strategy that's part of what we're talking about for tonight's hearing. Right.
Think of it as an investment, implementation plan for the next 2 years.
But we can certainly overlay the good maps you're talking about there, and I think we even have around the equity analysis, and so we can look back at that and bring that back.
It's important.
Oh, absolutely.
Recognize that things aren't working in certain places.
Right.
That if we're doing 201 projects,
Right.
that they're actually hitting in an equitable manner the places
Yeah.
that are having the most trouble.
Absolutely. Yep.
I just want to see.
Yeah. No, I think you're. So this is definitely.
That reminds me of it.
Right, right. And so this is not, this is trying to specifically highlight, because there's a lot of projects when you look at the overall project map. And I don't know, certainly accolades to the Planning Bureau around the map app. Hopefully you've been using it as a reference. Each iteration, I think we're getting better and better at showing the information. And that is something that's in our work program, is to go into even more detail once we finalize the TSP project list, giving people much more ability to navigate and find those projects specifically and better information about them. So I think we're making a lot of really good progress on making this information a lot more transparent. One of the key elements that we're also tracking is this graphic. This should be one that you're all familiar with, but this is talking about the sort of specific places and really where the higher need is and where also the higher projected population growth is. And so, of course, we want to make sure that we're putting our investment where there's primarily both high need and higher population. And so there's some key locations that we wanted to highlight for you on the map that we really are tracking, which is the upper right, I guess, it would be high need and higher population. Because that's where we already have a lot of need and deficiency, and we're also putting more pressure on those by adding growth in those areas. So, yeah.
Howard, quick, because we need to.
Howard, you're so kind to me. So again, we didn't think we'd have time tonight to go through the detailed investment strategy, but we certainly could provide that to you or give you that in advance of the next work session. I'll talk as loud as I can. Sorry. Okay. Thank you. Yep. How's that? Is that better? You really have to be close. Okay. I don't need two mics. That's scary. All right. So what is shown here is a capturing of the specific projects, and actually by project number, you can just barely see them, what are in the constrained funded or constrained list. So the green and blue are the funded and constrained projects that are located in that area. The orange would be ones that are on the unconstrained. So in this area, you can see that the primary coloring, just quick blush of looking at these areas captured, is that the possible projects that we know about are listed as something that are in the funded or the constrained. A couple examples where there's one in orange that is listed in the unconstrained. But so, as particularly I think in East Portland, in this specific zone, we have a lot of projects that are recommended in the very, very near term to address that need. So. At an even higher level, we did take a look at using the neighborhood coalition boundaries, kind of what is the future of growth in those areas and what is the constraint. So on the left pie chart is showing what is the share of constrained spending. So what's recommended in the constraint, so the percent going to different district coalitions. And on the right is the projection of jobs and households in those same geographies. It's just one of the many lenses of how close are we in terms of how many people are going to be there and what we're spending money on. So this is just one, and if you combine them together, they result in this amount of constrained spending allocation per user per future 2035 benefit. And this is one particularly that our commissioner has asked us, how many people are going to benefit from this? A lot of those kind of questions are coming from him. And so this is a product that we produced for him to help him answer that question. Yes, Joe.
Couple of questions on this figure. First of all, I like the display because it brings it down to the person level. But are there some major projects that are driving the differences in these investments? Or?
There are, and there's some that we've done some sort of tweaking back and forth. For instance, where does who benefits most from the reconfiguration of the Ross Island bridgehead? Is that a Central City benefit? Is that a Sweeney benefit? Those are some that where we've actually allocated between some of the districts to try to make them balance. But so certainly within this, there are major projects that are within some of these boundaries that are reflected in this as well. One of the things also is sort of the share of cost, just generally, some of the projects in some areas. So for instance, Sweeney has a lot of very expensive projects that are reflected in this cost.
Like some of the Southwest Corridor?
Southwest Corridor business and other agency project is not reflected in this.
Okay. Right. So, so for example, the Southwest neighborhood area, what's driving that high cost per capita or high investment per capita?
Lower projected growth overall. In terms of what's allowed by zoning, what's projected for zoning, and also very expensive projects. There's a lot of deficiencies in there and a lot of investments that we really want to make, but it's also, given the topography and the stormwater needs, it's a place in which we have some real challenges producing projects at a cost-effective scale that we can. That's one of the things that we're in very active conversation from Sweeney. I expect to hear testimony tonight and hopefully more information from them about which projects could we look at either segmenting or scoping. So segmenting would be biting them off in smaller chunks. Rescoping would be looking at, is there ways we can do it more effectively, more cheaply than what was originally the standard thought for full sidewalks and full stormwater systems. So that's probably an active feedback loop that I expect to have in this month and coming in through your work session.
Yeah. Last question. Have you looked at an equity analysis of the same type of data? For example, stratifying this into majority culture people and people of color, or and looking at, is there a differential investment going on here? There's obviously some different geography going on for a bunch of complex reasons, but
I think I'm going to ask Peter to ask that. He's been working a lot with the GIS team on a whole variety of things like this.
So one of the things we did is to take a look at the projects that scored the highest on equity, which are the ones that are going to provide the greatest benefit to underserved communities, and matched it with the constrained list. And well above 90% of the projects at the top of that provide the greatest benefit for underserved communities are on the constrained list.
And this is very similar to Karen's question, or sort of another version. So I think this is one definitely that we'll want to bring some better graphics back for the next work session. Yep, okay.
And to see the specific 10% of property, to delineate the specific projects.
Yeah, I think what we'll be able to do is that same blue, green, and orange, we can overlay that on top of some demographic information, and so you can kind of see how that relates, and that's definitely within our capabilities, I hope.
It would be good to put some dollars to that also.
Dollars to it as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we need to move on because we're running.
Yeah, I know. I apologize. We have so much we want to share. So one of the other important things is that really what this conversation is about tonight is where should city resources go, or resources the city has access to. We're not the only player in this geography, right? We have regional partners, we have other agencies that we work with that are able to invest or do invest or focus their investment on other projects. So for instance, we're not currently proposing any city investment in major freeway projects. However, there's a lot of money anticipated in the other agency projects to invest in freeways. What we're primarily focusing our money on is multimodal project investments, pedestrian and bicycle project improvements, leveraging freight projects, and investing in some transit improvements. So that we just want to make sure that you understood the context. We're going to hear a lot about, there's all these other things that we should be doing, but we actually have a lot of really good partner agencies that are helping us do a lot of those other things as well. So. Lastly, so this is one that maybe we can save more for the work session, but this is a look at freight projects that are in the funded, constrained, or unconstrained. So this is one that maybe fits in well with some of the other analysis we're talking about doing at the work session. So maybe we'll save the details of this, but this is one that we can look at more, and maybe we can overlay this with industrial job growth or one of those kind of things to make sure that one of the things that we know is another active conversation for you is industrial land supply needs. And so we obviously want to make sure that our freight investment strategy is a good companion with that conversation running in parallel with that. So. So you work your way back through this whole ride that we just took you on, and we go from strong policy direction, looking at key projects and programs, and we hope we have returned back around to those major outcomes that we started out with in making this soup. But that's part of the feedback loop we're hoping to get from you tonight and from the public, which is part of the public involvement step. This is not. This has been a long process, as you well know. It's being paired up with the comprehensive plan, and so we're heading into some exciting times in it. But this is not necessarily new for a lot of people. We've been talking about a lot of these elements for many, many months, and have had open houses and community outreach either paired with the comprehensive plan or specifically ourselves in recent months. Skip the next two. All right. Sorry, I have to anyway. All right. The PowerPoint is not responding. We've been told it's time to end. No, there we go.
Got tired.
All right. So the key piece right now, where we are in the current phase, is we are heading through the end of this current public comment period. We are actively looking for feedback from you and from community groups and neighborhood associations on what their top priority projects are to help us revise the initial findings that came through more of a criteria-based piece. We expect to see projects move up and down and change, and that's part of sort of a welcome part of this next phase right now. And also the modeling results, that will be all occurring. The next phase, the task 5 elements for those following the comp plan process in more detail are all listed on the right. There's a whole series of steps that we'll be taking as part of the task 5 to bring in the rest of the TSP elements together. So I think we better stop there to let other people talk to you.
Any quick comments before we go to Gary?
A quick methodological question. On the safety criterion, I was unclear as to the connection between high crash zones and actual injury and death data. And are those two things correlated with each other? Because I can envision a situation where there may be a huge number of fender benders and nobody gets hurt, and that's deemed a high crash corridor. So can you speak to the tightness of that connection?
Yes, when we identified the high crash corridors, they were driven by fatalities and the most serious of injuries. We share that same concern that we don't want to be focused on fender benders.
Okay, thank you.
We also identified corridors that may not have had fatalities and injuries because people aren't using them, but they have characteristics that would lead to that.
Right. Yes.
Quick,
Howard.
Howard, quick.
Just a quick comment. You mentioned that you're not trying to interact with the freeways, but more working on the transportation of the city. But in looking at that freight map, it inevitably interacts with the freeway,
Absolutely.
especially when you're moving freight near the Columbia River. So
Sure.
how does that all work?
We're a key partner in a lot of these projects. A lot of these are who's leading the project. So for instance, on ODOT-led facilities or port-led facilities, our engineers assist in those projects being delivered, or we're sometimes a leveraged funding partner, but we're not the leader of some of those projects. It really depends on the specific project how we apply. Oh, we are definitely tightly involved with the work of other agencies. Yeah.
Can I just give you one quick example, because it's been pretty positive to see the Freight Advisory Committee helping us with some of this analysis, and they've done some things I think are really thoughtful, like saying, boy, if a regional investment's going to take longer, maybe we want to do some kind of a intelligent transportation system timing sort of thing on another parallel facility, of really being thoughtful about what's happening on the regional system and how it's interacting with the local.
All right.
Thank you. We're going to have public testimony now, and then we'll come back up at the end and just have comments, and then we'll come back March 10th with a work session.
Yes, sounds great.
Great. The first three individuals are part of the TSP TAG, and Jim Owens, Phil Sillinger, and Linda Nedokoven. Jim,
ready for us?
Yep.
Good evening. I'm Jim Owens. I'm the facilitator for the 23-member Transportation Expert Group that's been jointly convened by your Bureau and the Bureau of Transportation to advise on goals and policies in the comprehensive plan and on the implementing measures in the 2035 TSP update. And I'm joined by two members of the TAG, Linda Nedokoven and Phil Sellinger. They're going to be making the bulk of the presentation. And we're not asking for 2 minutes for each of our 23 members, but we would like about 10 minutes to go through our comments, if that's possible.
For the three of you? Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. And we have provided written comments. There's two parts to those comments. The first parts are overall comments on the proposed goals and policies, the project evaluation prioritization process, and public involvement. These remarks reflect my understanding as facilitator of the general sense of the TAG. While they've been informally vetted with the TAG, there's not been a formal vote on these comments, and we may have some members of the TAG who disagree with certain aspects of these comments. We also have other members of the TAG here today who are going to be testifying on behalf of their respective groups. The second part are detailed comments submitted by individual TAG members, mostly about specific comprehensive plan policies. Please recognize these as individual comments. They have not been endorsed by the full TAG, but we definitely wanted to move those on to you. So I'm going to turn it over to Phil, and he's going to address the general policy direction. And then it will be followed by Linda, who will address the project evaluation process and public involvement.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon. As Jim said, my name is Phil Sellinger. I happen to be representing Northwest Neighborhoods on the TSP TAG, but of course my comments here tonight are coming from the full TAG, as Jim noted, regarding policy direction. The TAG's review of the proposed draft goals and policies build on the work of the former network expert group detailed comments. In general, the TAG believes that the proposed draft goals and policies adequately respond to the network PEG's comments. At the same time, TAG members had their own comments, which, as Jim said, are attached at the back of our testimony. So I'm going to list some of those general comments on the proposed draft policy direction, which includes the TAG supports the overall transportation system policy direction represented by proposed draft goals and policies, projects, and programs, and specifically policy direction that recognizes the role of the transportation system in supporting local and regional economic growth, targets growth and investment to centers and corridors, reduces carbon emissions associated with the transportation sector, promotes equitable transportation investments. I think you heard some of that at the front end of the staff presentation. There's also concern that policy language, in many cases, as directed by the city attorney's office, is too wishy-washy and I say wishy-washy in quotes there, with terms like encourage, support, promote, coordinate, versus statements that might be more assertive and affirmative, like secure a range of transportation funding sources. So, right. We were also concerned that while the proposed draft assumes coordination among city bureaus to accomplish plan objectives, in real life, the experience is that all too often the opposite is true. This has often hampered progress in providing transportation facilities in a timely and cost-effective way. Perhaps the TAG's most significant concern is the absence of clearly articulated process and criteria for resolving conflicts among policies, classification, modes, etc. The proposed draft identifies a multitude of centers, corridors, transit station areas, city greenways, urban habitat corridors, employment areas, pattern areas, without any mention of how they would be reconciled with and against each other. While supporting the concept, there is concern that the proposed transportation hierarchy fails to recognize the continuing role of autos and freight and is absent a strategy to resolve conflicts among modes. As drafted, the weighing of modal transportation needs with a hierarchy sends the wrong message by implying that motor vehicles will be shunned and perhaps not even accommodated on some streets. There needs to be more guidance on how this hierarchy will be used. The TAG recommends that the city take a more assertive role regarding transit. Rather than just punting that responsibility to TriMet, the city should work directly with TriMet in identifying the future transit network. We request that trails be recognized as part of the transportation network. We have concern that while proposed policies recognize the role of the Willamette and Columbia Rivers as transportation infrastructure, there are no specific strategies and projects to implement this policy direction. There is concern that there is inadequate discussion of safety for all modes, but particularly the need to create a safer pedestrian system. Safety is more than just connectivity. We have concern that there is inadequate emphasis on regional coordination and existing classification conflicts across jurisdiction boundaries. And finally, for my part, we express concern that the proposed parking policies are premature given the recent launch of a citywide parking strategy. So I turn it over to Linda.
Thank you. Linda Nedekoven, and I'll be talking about the projects and programs and public involvement piece here. Needless to say, the project selection process and the project list has been a major focus for the transportation expert group this past year. One of the results, besides the evaluation criteria, is also the establishment of a programmatic category. As Peter mentioned earlier, this is really an innovation to target the smaller kinds of projects that could get lost in the shuffle, left on the shelf, et cetera. We do have a number of sort of caveats or comments that we want to make sure you consider as you're listening to the testimony that follows and reviewing the materials that you're being presented. First, Art used the example of making a soup. I would probably use the example of building the plane while flying it in terms of developing these evaluation criteria, trying to kind of test them, use them, develop the list at the same time. This has been a really heavy lift for staff, and they've worked very hard at it, and we want to make sure that people understand it's still an experiment that needs to be tested and refined over time. And again, some of the questions you're already asking about that process are important. We're also concerned that many parties are confused by this process and the prioritization, and folks are unaware that the smaller projects are being included now in a citywide program category rather than on the project list. And so this is, again, as I said, this building it while flying it. We are requesting that the TAG continue to be involved in the refinement of the project evaluation criteria refinement process. We've done a test drive, but we've only had a small taste, and we really want to see how it worked when the staff actually used the criteria. We want to understand that better and continue to be helpful in that regard. We're obviously very supportive of outcome-based criteria for evaluating major projects and citywide programs, but we also want to make sure that there's the challenge of using evaluation criteria to identify projects or programs that maybe score well on only a few criteria, but serve a very critical role in achieving some key outcomes. And so trying to find a way to make those criteria work appropriately in that regard. We certainly support, again, the establishment of the citywide program category so that the bureaus can prioritize, fund, and deliver the smaller cost-effective projects. This allows the Bureau to be opportunistic in terms of, they've got projects already planned and bundled so that when they see a grant opportunity, they can go for it. So again, it's very important that people understand how that small project list works and be able and to know that it will be periodically updated and perhaps using a 5-year project pipeline to continually make sure we've got the right projects on that list. So we need to include both bundles from citywide programs and major projects that way. Obviously very supportive of the PBOT's work to realistically forecast future revenues. That makes it easier to force ourselves to identify the projects and programs that'll deliver the greatest benefits and to also report more realistic performance results. We are, I think, in many parts of the city a little bit lax in being able to have the resources to report those performance results. We're very concerned about the correlation of the lists in the comprehensive plan and the map app. The project list without a map in the comprehensive plan does not coincide with those shown on the map app. So we need one consolidated list and map, that's still to come. We're recommending that PBOT develop a program of regularly reporting on the performance of the draft constrained project and program lists, including how the projects and programs support the comprehensive plans focused on centers and corridors and job centers, and then performance modeling for access, mobility, mode share, vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas emissions, and other factors that should be developed and publicly shared so that we all can kind of keep track of how we're doing. And then finally, in terms of the public outreach, staff has worked very hard, especially these past few weeks since the list was released on the 30th, to touch a lot of bases with a lot of different groups. However, we're still concerned that folks don't understand the relationship of the TSP to other plans, processes, et cetera, going forward, and it's making it sort of tough for people to respond. And there's been a kind of a lack of clarity. It's not quite clear what the TAG's role is in terms of public involvement. Obviously, community support is a key criterion, but how do we get in there and assist and critique, if necessary, the work that's being done? So there's more work that probably needs to happen in that realm. Our greatest concern at the moment is the abbreviated timeline for comments on the proposed projects and programs. This is our only public hearing, and we only have until March 13th, and some folks, of course, didn't really see a list and weren't tracking it, perhaps until January 30th. Anyway, so some of the frustration is being expressed to us, and we feel some of it ourselves. And so we know that there are a lot of valid reasons for this updated process, including your hearing schedule, but we're concerned about that having a negative impact further down the road. We certainly support, as I said, the efforts that staff has made, but we're very supportive of their efforts to reach out to underrepresented groups during this last round and throughout the process. But we're really wanting to make sure that this is a continuing relationship building that goes on and not just showing up to get a little bit of feedback and check a box on a public involvement plan. So, we want to make sure that we all do a good job in maintaining relationships over time. So we look forward to being partners with the Bureau in doing this work, and we thank you for your time tonight.
Great.
And Mr. Chair, that's really all we...
That's all you got?
Yeah.
Okay. Chris?
So, full disclosure, I'm the commission liaison to the TAG and filled a similar role in the prior network PEG. My sense is that the TAG has had a chance to review a lot of material, did not necessarily get to conclusions on all of it. I mean, Phil mentioned the transportation hierarchy. Linda, you talked about the project list. It does feel hurried. So my question to you is the TAG actually done with the task force work that it needs to do, or has it been truncated too early?
That's a loaded question. Well, I don't think we're ever done. And if you're specifically, are you specifically referring to the goals and policies portion or to the project?
Both.
Okay.
I mean, there's
So,
the task 5 stuff like the parking policy that we know is sort of coming out in phases, but the specific task 4 stuff that we will adopt with the comp plan versus the implementing legislation, yeah. Should the TAG have more time to develop a fuller recommendation to us?
Well, I think we will, of course, review the public comments you receive and likely comment to the Bureau on that public comment and perhaps provide additional recommendations on goals and policies. That'll be up to the group. As we indicated in the testimony, we see the project evaluation prioritization process we've had a test run. We made one lap around the track. Now we're going to make another lap. And so we expect to be fully involved in that as well. Does that answer?
I'd be curious on Phil and Linda's perspective on the question.
No, I mean, I think Jim had it pretty well. At this point, the TEG has not focused on projects individually. We did some scenarios, test driving the evaluation criteria, but, we ourselves are just beginning to get familiar with what is or isn't on the projects list as a result of the evaluation work that staff has done.
And I'll comment from a public involvement perspective. And my concern is that given the kind of sprint that we've been trying to do in regard to this, that we end up with a bifurcated result where we've got people in the know who understand systems already and are able and have been watching all along and kind of understand how the pieces fit together, are more able to be commenting on these. And when you come back to community support, so if you don't even know the project's out there, how can you be supporting it? That kind of catch-22. And then folks that haven't had any experience or much experience with the transportation realm, even if they know there's now this list, it's hard to figure out from, again, the short list with a brief description of a project. Most people aren't going to wade into hundreds of pages. It's tough. We've gotten obviously a lot of good feedback. You'll get a lot more tonight. But I still think that, maybe the best we do is we plan for 2 years from now when it's updated again in a more comprehensive way. But I think we just haven't been able to kind of do more of the kind of organizing, except for some parts of the city. I would say East Portland with EPIM and places that have already been working on this for a long time. But a lot of the rest, other parts have not been as involved.
It's a complex story to tell.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I suspect I'll return to this question at the end of the evening after we hear from the community and the other TEG members. Thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, I have a process question. I have several questions actually specific to Phil's presentation. And I think what I'd prefer to do is rather than get into a lengthy conversation because they are complicated issues, is that I think it's appropriate for me to send my questions to the committee and ask for some feedback rather than get into a protracted conversation now.
Yep.
Because we have a lot of people waiting.
Yeah, and we have a work session coming up on March 10th, so any communication you can provide Mike. And really, I think, you talked about you're going to do another review. If you're doing that review, if you can get it to us also, be helpful.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. I will now call up 3 at a time. Again, this is the public testimony. You have 2 minutes, so be aware. Terry Parker, Jeannie Harrison, and Marianne Fitzgerald. Terry, you want to get started?
Yes, thank you. My name's Terry Parker. I'm a resident of Northeast Portland. At the City Council hearings on the street maintenance fee, testifier after testifier kept asking, where has all the money gone? The answer is not just blowing in the wind. Clearly as illustrated in the TSP, motorist paid gas taxes are being siphoned off to pay for specialized bicycle infrastructure for freeloaders, which in many instances also reduces motor vehicle capacity in lanes. As delivered in testimony at the fuel standard hearing in Salem, even AAA has come to the conclusion that road diets are adding to congestion and thereby making air quality worse rather than better. Unlike a balanced process that would have seats at the table proportionate with the mode split, where taxpaying motorists would be justly represented, the gas tax ripoff continues because the various transportation committees that pick the priorities and set the budgets are stacked decks of anti-automobile alternative mode activists that want everything paid for by the people that drive. Nearly 10% of the jobs in the U.S. are tied to the auto industry. Not stealing from the gas tax and supporting these family wage jobs with motor vehicle infrastructure improvements is a significant component to sustaining a vibrant economy. That said, any bicycle infrastructure project in the TSP that reduces motor vehicle capacity needs to be removed. In my neighborhood, that means eliminating a portion of the Halsey Street bikeway between 39th and 67th because, one, the street is constrained by its narrow width. Two, neighbors near Providence Home Services want parking on Halsey maintained so overflow from the parking lot does not take place on the residential cross streets. Three, the failing intersection at 60th needs a westbound left turn lane pocket within the existing right-of-way. Four, the two motor vehicle lanes in each direction for the jog on Halsey between 57th and 60th need to be maintained. Five, with two lanes in each direction, Halsey between 39th and 47th is frequently congested. And six, the Tillamook-Hancock bikeway is a mere 2 to 3 blocks to the north. Likewise, because 4 full motor vehicle lanes with parking on both sides of the street need to be maintained to support traffic volumes and small businesses on Sandy Boulevard, only the pedestrian crossing portion of the Sandy Corridor improvements should be carried forward. Finally, the Sullivan's Gulch Trail equitably needs to be paid for by the bicycling community who will use it, and not by rating motorists' paid taxes and fees. And any streetcar expansion needs to be derailed because it is not financially self-sustainable, has exorbitant costs for taxpayers, and will only create more congestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeannie?
Good evening. My name is Jean Harrison, and I'm testifying on behalf of the Northwest District Transportation Committee. The NWDA board has endorsed a specific streetcar extension to serve the newly developing northeast portion of our neighborhood that was approved through the Conway Master Plan. It's critical that this rapidly developing area is well served by multiple transit options. We're requesting a new project, an extension of the streetcar line on Northwest Northrop that would extend north on 21st to Thurman and then run on Thurman to 23rd and finally travel on Northwest 23rd to Northrop. Further, we're requesting that a study be placed on the TSP studies list that would examine a further extension of streetcar service to Montgomery Park. The other changes we're asking for are combining projects 60027 and 11740, as these two projects are linked and should be constructed at the same time. The first one relates to reconfiguration of the Northwest 23rd Vaughan and I-405 ramp, and the other one relates to creating a jug handle from that intersection that would loop onto Wilson and then create a new connection for Northwest 20th that would serve Conway. This project is our highest priority as it is essential to improving the function of this gateway to the neighborhood and providing a key access point to the Conway Master Plan area. We're asking that 2 studies be reinstated and put on the TSP studies list. These studies are currently listed as projects 60002 and 60010. The studies would investigate the feasibility of decoupling 18th and 19th and Everett and Gleason. All 4 of these streets are classified as local service streets, and couplets are not appropriate. Finally, we are not sure what happens to major reconstruction projects. Northwest 23rd between Lovejoy and Vaughan is in terrible shape. It's failing, and PDOT has identified it as a crucial reconstruction need, but I don't understand where it is in the project list. Finally, our other high priority project is the Northwest Flanders overpass for pedestrians and bicycles and the continuation of a bicycle route from the Steel Bridge to Northwest 23rd. And finally, I'd just like to say that we do support having program areas. I think that's a real advantage for smaller projects that can have a big impact on our neighborhoods, but we would like to know what those projects are. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mary Ann?
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Mary Ann Fitzgerald, and I'm testifying today on behalf of Southwest Neighborhoods Coalition with just highlights PBOT's release of the detailed materials on January 30th put us in a time crunch to meet your deadlines, but more detailed comments will be submitted soon. We have a similar questions to a lot of the questions I heard tonight. First, that the draft comp plan directs growth to centers and corridors, but they cannot function as described in the plan until adequate and safe pedestrian and bicycle facilities and crossings are provided, and transit levels are improved so that all residents can access bus stops, grocery stores, and other essential destinations without relying on a motor vehicle. Each center and corridor must have supporting projects in the TSP to create a complete neighborhood. Second, Sweeney also prioritized projects out of the staff's top-ranked list of projects in our neighborhoods, and Southwest Capitol Highway between Multnomah and Taylor's Ferry and Southwest Barber Boulevard remain our top priorities for needed pedestrian, bicycle, and safety improvements. Third, a number of our neighborhoods have requested new projects or modifications to existing projects to focus on the high-priority key segments before PBOT's January 9th deadline. These comments are not reflected in the January 30th materials, probably because this update is a technical update. PBOT must complete a more thorough update as soon as possible to address comments received in this update so that the volunteer hours are not wasted, and that we can also incorporate the Southwest Emotion Study that will begin next fiscal year. Finally, Sweeney appreciates all the efforts to prioritize projects based on outcomes, but we have not seen exactly how they rank out. We cannot get access to the scorings, and we would really like access to the scorings by the end of this week so that we can get our comments in more thoughtfully before the March 13th deadline. As we stated in our letter of January 2nd, we request that any consideration of costs and benefits in the TSP account for district-specific issues that add to the cost of the projects, but also provide many benefits outside of the transportation realm, benefits to the environment, benefits to public health, connectivity, and decreased dependence on fossil fuels. These comments support all the goals outlined in the comp plan to create a transportation network accessible to people of all ages, needs, and abilities citywide.
Thank you.
Excuse me, can you tell me what END stands for?
And displacement.
Oh, David, you want to explain this end displacement? I think.
And displacement.
Okay.
Okay.
Displacement.
I'm for that.
Okay.
In other words, we want to stay in our neighborhoods that we want.
Oh, okay, okay. I'm generally
Okay.
in favor of displacement ending.
The next three are Jeremy
some endings,
Tennant,
not all.
David Hampstein,
ending
and Jennifer Vitrolo. David Hampstein. Is he Hempstead? Is he here? All right. Brad Perkins. Jennifer, you want to get started?
Am I first?
Yeah.
Okay, sure. Hi, my name is Jennifer Vitello, and I'm here today on behalf of the Cathedral Park Neighborhood Association. I'm here today to testify on behalf of TSP ID number 30050, and to the extent that it's still relevant, the 2004 St. John's Lombard Plan, Transportation Actions for the Hillside and Riverfront, designated as HR 1 through HR 6, and TC 10 and TC 21. So, as many of you know, Cathedral Park is a very historic old neighborhood. Here I have a picture from 1906, before the St. John's Bridge was built, and that's my house right there. So we've been there for a long time. Our neighborhood extends from Ida Ave, which is affectionately called the Cut, where the railroad cut is, all the way over to Weyerhaeuser Street on the other side of Cathedral Park, and incorporates the St. John's Bridge. And it's bordered by University Park, St. John's, and the Willamette Riverfront. Currently, it's a very small neighborhood, both geographically and in terms of population. But under the comprehensive plan, we are going to turn into, most of the landmass will turn into a high-density urban center. And we are all actually very excited about that. We're looking forward to the increased opportunities for housing, for jobs, and also for increased access to the riverfront. Our concerns arise just with regard to the transportation. Currently, we do not have any, most of the streets in our neighborhood don't have any pavement. We certainly don't have any sidewalks. We don't have any curb extensions, traffic calming. We don't have any traffic lights. We don't have, most of the roads, many of them don't even go through. They just stop dead-end bushes where it's supposed to be a street. So we are just here tonight to support the project, say that we are very excited about the improved transportation in the neighborhood, particularly concerned about the lack of, am I done?
No, finish your
Oh,
comment.
sorry. The
Finish
lack
your
of bicycle access in Cathedral Park. So along Willamette Boulevard, which is one of the most heavily used recreational bike roads in the city, the bike lane goes all the way through University Park and then stops dead right at where Cathedral Park starts. So throughout that entire rest of the area, there's no bicycle transportation, and it's very concerning, particularly between Richmond and Burlington Ave, where a lot of commuters have decided to try and avoid the truck traffic on Ivanhoe. So they're making that area a high-speed cut-through, but we've still got huge packs of bikes coming down through the neighborhood. So it's just sort of it's a real safety hazard, and it's a life and safety concern for our neighborhood.
Thank you.
Is that good?
That's
okay.
good.
Is there some place where I've actually got some addition? Oh, wonderful.
Provide it to Julie.
Thank you so much.
Jeremy?
Hi, Jeremy Byron Tennant. I want to thank this commission for your work. I'm testifying about impacts on Woodlawn. Please recommend the 13th, 14th Avenue Greenway to be completed in years 1 through 5, as opposed to leaving it until years 11 through 20. The 22nd Avenue Greenway should be treated the same. Please note a lack of information available on the proposed 11th, 13th Avenue overcrossing between Lombard and Columbia near Woodlawn School. No promise has been made for a train quiet zone, but I think that we need one. The proposed industrial collector distributor for Northeast Argyle Street, again, is very close to Woodlawn School. Woodlawn Elementary PTA has expressed concerns to me about the impacts of diesel particulate matter on communities of color. It is difficult to perceive how the new freight priority program will not harm Woodlawn. All rails on Kenton Line should be electric to reduce local pollution. Widening of MLK probably won't benefit Woodlawn. Please strongly consider recommending that Portland seek exemption to Goal 9. This appears to be the only way that goals and policies of equity and environmental justice can be fulfilled. Please ensure that words such as prevent and prohibit are applied where necessary to limit future expenses caused by pollution, such as the estimated $100 million needed to achieve 60% brownfield redevelopment. Thank you for your careful consideration of the comp plan and TSP.
Thank you. Brad?
Good evening. I'm Brad Perkins. I represent the Northeast Business Association. In many plans from the state down to the local level, we talk about creating more living wage jobs, reducing pollution 40 to 50% below 1990 levels by 2030, and emphasizing sustainability, etc. Oregon's most important planning goals were initiated in 1973 under Governor Tom McCall's leadership. It was Senate Bill 100 which forced every local jurisdiction to plan for growth, resulting in protecting our beautiful natural resources by instituting urban growth boundaries to limit suburban sprawl. It was big picture planning that protected our environment in Oregon, and it's an important reason why so many people visit Oregon and move here. It is this big picture approach we need today to plan, develop, and work with the feds, state legislature, and private industry to secure needed financing for new transportation system projects. Forming 3Ps, or public-private partnerships for project planning and development, is a model for progressive, sustainable growth for our future. Portland's transportation planning and development should exemplify where the rest of the world is going, i.e. new exclusive corridors for bikes and high-speed commuter and intercity trains. High-speed rail station stops are hubs for all transportation systems. Tax increment financing from increased real estate values around these new station hubs and along off-street bike corridors could create the funding necessary to help finance new transportation corridors. The Portland Planning Commission and Planning and Sustainable Bureau and PBOT need to take a much stronger position with the Oregon Department of Transportation, ODOT. Planning failures regarding overcapacity corridors such as I-5's Columbia River Crossing and now Oregon's passenger rail corridor plan on Union Pacific's privately owned tracks are a waste of time and tens of millions of tax dollars. NEBA, which is our organization, supports funding for an off-street bike corridor connecting the Willamette and Columbia Rivers. We should build the Sullivan's Gulch Trail from the Willamette River to 37th Avenue Fred Meyer segment first, where we can avoid Union Pacific's right of way. Rename it the Willamette Columbia River Trail, which will follow an old Indian trail, Sandy Boulevard
Can you wrap
shortcut
it up?
between these two mighty rivers in Oregon. The new corridor could be a catalyst for mixed-use development
Thank
at
you.
up to zone locations along the
Thank
way.
you. That's that.
NEBA also
You're
supports.
done. We're done. We're past 2 minutes, and give you a little extra time.
You planned for 3 minutes as advertised, okay? And we waited close to an hour and a half. You could have had the public testimony first.
Thank you.
All of us are waiting. It's a shame that you treat the public this way.
Thank you. The next three are Dan Walters, John Gibbon, David Martin. Dan, you want to get started?
Good. My name is Dan Lurch Walters. I hyphenated when I got married. The Sullivan's Gulch Bike Trail goes through my backyard, and I'm here to ask you to build it. It's a great opportunity. I see it's on the constrained list. I think that the whole trail should be built in the first 10 years. I've personally worked on it in the last 10 years and see it as something that is just a vital addition to our 40-mile loop trails and other connected trails on both sides of the freeway and the 20s bikeways that will make this a world-class biking city. I think we already are. The trail separates the contact points between pedestrians and bicyclists so that and cars and freight, so that we will be reducing injury and death. The health of Sullivan's Gulch is really poor. It's full of invasives, ivy, clematis, blackberries. This is an opportunity to restructure that environmentally, put in more native species and trees, creating a really nice green zone. The trail, when built all the way out, will connect with the trail on 84 about 122nd or something, or closer, that goes along the freeway there. It connects to the 205 trail, which connects to Marine Drive, which goes to Washington. It can connect to, by the Springwater Corridor Trail, will connect to this, or excuse me, by the 205 trail, will connect to the Springwater Trail. It just adds so much space to our 20-minute neighborhood that it makes it accessible to bike from East Portland downtown. Connects city centers, Hollywood, Rose Quarter, Lloyd District, all of this together. It's a very important project, and thanks for having it on the constrained list.
Thank you. John?
John Gibbon, speaking behalf.
Speak into the microphone.
Yeah. Sorry. Speaking on behalf of PERB tonight, I want to advise you that we have written comments coming relating to the planning challenges related to the storm water component of our brief. PERB's operative assumption and is that ratepayer money just can't be handed over to whatever project the transportation engineers have designed, but it can and should be used to reinforce success. Handling stormwater is one of the major cost drivers in the city, and it impacts every area in the city. We want you to push for policies for concurrency on planning in transportation and stormwater management. Once a major transportation project is identified, begin the stormwater discussion immediately. Possibly pull in planning and BDS to encourage private visioning and contribution in terms of these stormwater projects, because otherwise the bank is going to get broke. At least you should put Tabor to the River on steroids. You've been briefed on that project. We've seen it on site. It really did save the ratepayers a lot of money and create a good transportation project because we worked at it together. But it's rare in this city for these two bureaus to be working together on a project. You've got the ability to tell them they should, and you must, in adopting policies in this comprehensive plan. The results of Tabor to the River, the results of that kind of planning are too impressive not to attempt to accomplish it again and again. And if possible, we need to exceed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is David Martin. I am representing the Bridal Mile Neighborhood Association. There are two specific projects that I wanted to speak about, Hamilton Street and Shattuck Road. Neither street currently has any pedestrian facilities, which results in the majority of traffic to Bridal Mile School being by bus and car. There's no way for people to walk. These are not new projects to the Neighborhood Association. We have a 97 study vision for the Neighborhood Association asking for transportation improvements, a 2005 Safe Routes to School study, a 2007 BES Ditches to Swale study, and a 2007 Halo Lid study. The need and recognition of the problems are not new. Because of this, when you conducted the public outreach portion of the prioritizing the TSP list, the results were not at all surprising to us. And correct me if I'm wrong, but by my calculations, Hamilton Street received the most positive comments of any project on the MAP app. 85 individual comments during the initial commenting period ending January 9th, which was almost 14% of the comments submitted. Shattuck was number 2 on the list with 57 comments. Combined, the two projects total 20% of all the comments that were submitted for the TSP list. And based upon that overwhelming public support, our neighborhood association remains at a loss as how you completely drop Hamilton Street from active consideration and throw Shattuck Road into an unfunded project for years 11 through 20. Two immediate obvious things. The Hamilton project had a very steep price tag of $12.4 million. It's our feeling that could be done for considerably less. BES is doing a Hamilton roadside swales project this summer, 2015. The price of that is it's for 1,000 feet, it's under 100,000 feet. If you calculate that out for a mile, it's under $500,000 a mile. We realize it isn't as simplistic as saying you can do the whole Hamilton Street for $750,000, but we know you could do it for a lot less than $12.4 million. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike, just a sec.
No, I just have a quick comment for the audience. I did check, and this commission feels very strongly about honoring folks who come here to testify. And in the public notice, it was 2 minutes were given, just for the record, so people understand that. I'll talk to Brad later.
It does say 3 minutes here.
What are you looking
Well, I was misinformed then. Thanks. I was told otherwise.
Oh. Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
The fact remains, we care very much about your participation.
I think your point's well taken, Mike. Thanks for checking. The next three are David Sweet, Laura Young, and Steve Messinotti. I can't say it. Messinetti. Laura, you want to get started? Oh, you're going to go first.
You'll see why in a minute.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is David Sweet. I represent the Cully Association of Neighbors, where I'm Land Use Chair. In May of 2012, this commission unanimously approved the Cully Main Street and Local Streets Plan, and in August of 2012, the City Council adopted the plan. The plan includes a recommendation to implement pilot projects in a defined area in Cully to test the performance of a range of street improvement options. All streets in the target area are either substandard or unimproved. None of them has sidewalks. This recommendation was unaccountably omitted from the TSP major project list, and that omission needs to be corrected. The major project list does include 10 other projects that are important to the Cully neighborhood, and all are given a high priority, constrained with a 1 to 10 year time frame. This estimated $35 million infrastructure investment is much needed and appreciated. However, a public investment of that magnitude will raise the risk that Cully's most vulnerable residents will be displaced by new development and rising costs. Another recommendation this body made and the Council adopted in 2012 directs the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability to use Cully as a case study for developing policies and strategies that anticipate and address the displacement impacts of gentrification. We have yet to see evidence of such an effort. In Cully, we are working diligently to prevent displacement, and you will hear today from representatives of a number of groups that are part of that effort. Together, they are recommending to you a package of anti-displacement policies and strategies developed in the absence of city leadership that was just handed out. I encourage you to include these policies and strategies in the comprehensive plan. Help us fight displacement in Cully. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Laura Young. I'm the District Manager for the East Cully Neighborhood Prosperity Initiative, known as the Cully Boulevard Alliance. I am also a longtime resident of the Cully neighborhood, and I serve as the Transportation Chair for the Cully Association of Neighbors. I would like to follow David's testimony by reiterating the critical importance of thoughtful and intentional investment in the Cully neighborhood. As decades-long we've waited for desperately needed infrastructure investments, they have finally reached our horizon, and this commission is presented with an unprecedented opportunity to begin to close the gap between those who will prosper from urban renewal and those who will be displaced as a result of it. I urge this commission to see beyond the price tag of the planned infrastructure investments in Cully to a far greater potential of using these investments as a tool to create local living wage jobs as a part of the city's commitment to finding and implementing tools to prevent the effects of forced displacement in urban renewal areas. Within the 1 to 10 year time horizon, I believe there exists a tremendous opportunity for partnership between the city, government, contractors, and locally driven community-serving organizations to develop community-serving education and training programs, to identify willing and capable local candidates to fill those positions that will result in job-ready workforce of skilled and semi-skilled tradespeople who will be ready to fill those jobs when the time is right. I believe it is this kind of investment that will build long-term financial stability in the community, begin to close the door on intergenerational poverty, and ultimately prevent displacement of our most vulnerable residents. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for your time this evening. Steve Messinetti, I'm the Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity in Portland. As you probably know, we're a nonprofit organization that builds and renovates homes for families, low-income families to purchase. And in recent years, we've seen a huge increase in the number of families coming to us for help. And just this past month, actually, we opened up our application process, and over 500 families came to us for applications, which is almost double what we've seen just since last year. Housing affordability is now at a crisis level in our city, and in just the past 10 years, I saw in the paper recently, we've seen a 65% increase in the cost of housing in our city, which puts us in the top 10 in the nation of, in terms of price increases. So what does this have to do with our agenda tonight? I appreciate the equity lens that transportation has put on their projects, but I really ask for your careful consideration of the strategies in the proposal that was just handed out to ensure that these transportation improvements do not result in the displacement of the residents that they're designed to better serve. Habitat for Humanity is a member of Living Cully, which is an effort in Cully to help develop the community without displacing low-income and residents and people of color. And in fact, we've recently began hosting a staff member in our office that's the Living Cully Anti-Displacement Coordinator to lead this effort. And in Cully, 2 out of every 5 households currently have a housing cost burden, which means over 30% of their income is being spent on housing. That's over 2,000 households that are at risk for displacement. And we see similar numbers in other neighborhoods we're working in, like Lentz, Centennial, and Rosewood. We want to see these improvements happen that will increase the quality of life for residents, but we want to make sure that they do not displace the families that they're meant to support. So encourage you to consider these policy changes, which will help us put us on track to improving the quality of life for all residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris?
So a comment about the street pilot in Cully. Because I'm a glutton for punishment, I'm also on the City Budget Advisory Committee trying to provide the linkage between the plans and the implementation. Director Treat presented a budget request for a pilot program for alternative street standards to build some things to see how they work. Council didn't fund it. So just a reminder that, we can start with the policy here, but you also need to be in those forums where the implementation decisions get made and continue to support it down the road. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. As a member of the PBOT Budget Advisory Committee, I have been pushing for that. I would like to see it in the plan. It's not going to get funded if it isn't there.
Good point. Thank you. Next 3 are Alan Hippolito, Ray Espana, and Laura Campos. Huh? Ray's not here. Okay. Barbara Quinn. Alan, go ahead and get started.
Sure, I'll do the Ray intro. It's a blessing to be here with you today. My name is Alan Hippolito. I work for Verde. We're a nonprofit in Northeast Portland's Cully neighborhood. As you heard Steve say, we're a partner with Habitat for Humanity, with Hacienda CDC and NEA in Living Cully, which is a long-term community-based and collaborative strategy to address multiple disparities in health, education, income, community engagement, natural resources by concentrating environmental investments at the neighborhood scale and braiding those investments with traditional community development resources. The Living Cully partners, we believe that sustainability can be reinterpreted as an anti-poverty strategy. And so we've taken sustainability and turned it into a powerful tool to address the needs of low-income people. We've attracted new environmental funding and technical assistance that had not been previously invested in low-income neighborhoods. And we've used these resources to engage community in the design and implementation of our Cully-based programs and capital projects, including a street that's piloting alternative design standards. We've had real success in driving these new investments in Cully, and as we've long anticipated, the question now rapidly transitions from will Cully's environment improve to will current residents be able to stay in the neighborhood as it improves. Anti-displacement work is our collaborative's most challenging activity. There is no tried and true way to prevent displacement in a redevelopment neighborhood. And many choose to ignore this issue or they treat it as unsolvable. But we propose that we address it as a core aspect of our work together, that we advance a model of environmental wealth alongside racial and economic diversity. So I'm here to support the testimony of David, Laura, Steve, express that we can only support the improvements and investments called for in the TSP and in the comp plan if they're accompanied by the anti-displacement measures that have been submitted tonight by the Citywide Coalition, because transportation improvements threaten to cause displacement. And indeed, our default assumption is that all elements of the comp plan can support neighborhood stability. So I'm here to say that we're counting on Commission leadership, responsive leadership. That is, groups that represent and organize with low-income people and people of color have set a clear request before you for new and more powerful anti-displacement tools. We need these things to happen. Absent this, we know that many low-income people and people of color will not be able to stay in the neighborhoods in which the proposed transportation projects will be built.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Laura Campos. I live at 3419 Southwest First. I have been involved with Cully. I'm a Cully advisor, but I live in Southwest, and I'm not here to represent anyone but my own views. I was interested in the word intersectionality, and I think it applies because we're talking about the TSP. But I'm curious to see how the demolition delay policies and displacement, affordable housing, gentrification, how those all intersect. So they don't act independently of one another. Instead, those forms of oppression interrelate, creating a system of oppression that reflects the intersection of multiple forms of discrimination. And I think that's what the former speaker alluded to, its complexity. I'm old enough to remember the historical urban renewal of the 60s. It happened to my relatives, wholesale bulldozing of largely non-white neighborhoods. Our community was labeled blight. Having worked on the original comp plan back in the 70s, the ability to define, possess, and own property has been a central feature of power in America, and where social benefits largely accrue to property owners. Majority of people of color, unfortunately, in Portland, are not property owners and do not benefit, as previous speakers talked about. Like Mike Hauk, who said he's been involved in planning for 40 years, I too have worked in it since 1975. But what differentiates me is my involvement in a community called Outsider. It's a group usually denied access to the activities or concerns of the community. I've been largely acting on the margins. But there's an important component to being an outsider. You possess a valuable perspective on the planning process, because I've been forced to sit on the margins and observe, and not by choice, but that circumstance. I urge you to listen to the communities of color that have been testifying, because their perspectives are very valuable.
Thank you.
Okay.
My name is Barbara Quinn. I'm here representing the Friends of Baltimore Woods in Cathedral Park Neighborhood Association area. And I'm here specifically to talk about Project 103750, which is the Cathedral Park Whistle-Free Zone. It is a long-standing community vision, and I wanted to talk to you today about some other related visions with this project. You may not think a whistle-free zone is really transportation-oriented, but it achieves three very important things goals for our neighborhood. Number one, it improves North Bradford, which currently has their track running down the middle of it, and makes it more of an accessible street for trucks and autos for manufacturing and businesses. And that achieves the freeing up of Decatur, which is the North Portland Greenway Trail alignment. The Baltimore Woods corridor runs along this section of Decatur, which is now classified as a regular auto truck street. And it's simply not the vision of Friends of Baltimore Woods to have the regional trail users sharing the street with trucks as they're enjoying this natural area that we've spent so much time, and the city and Metro have spent so much time and money acquiring. So we live in a truck district. We have trucks on so many of our streets. We would like 5 blocks of respite from trucks where people can bring their kids and not have to worry about safety. So we would really like to see that section of Decatur reclassified as pedestrian and bicycle only. And so this particular project does that. It frees up Decatur. It points North Bradford, the main access point to industry, for industry trucks. They're currently using Bradford anyway. It's just not an ideal street. And it also achieves another thing that another Cathedral Park member brought up. We have about 1,000 new people in our neighborhood. For a 3,500 person neighborhood, that's a lot of increase. We're expecting to see a lot more increase over the next 20 years. And we have 15 years ago, the Port of Portland started, or rather the Toyota facility started a 24-hour operation, which involves train loading and train whistles in the middle of the night. So that's another goal. We would like to have a quiet zone.
Thank you.
I have a quick question for Alan. You recall when we were with the Coalition for a Livable Future a few years back, there was a racial and displacement impact statement that went along with, that we worked on for interstate light rail. I'm curious how successful you think that effort was, and are any elements of that being incorporated into your current thinking?
Well, we were able to present some analysis at that time, but we were never able to move through that kind of anticipatory document that said, you do this, here are the pros and cons. So I think what resonates for me from that is that you had a similar scenario. You had the organizations working alongside, advocating, organizing with the groups most at risk of displacement, saying, we need this kind of help. We need these kinds of tools. And those tools didn't manifest. That help didn't come together. That, I think, persists. That's the message, that we need these kinds of tools, and we're calling for that kind of response, because it's going to take something different, clearly, than what we're doing now. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. The next 3 are Rebecca Hamilton, Jacqueline Gandy, and Arlene Kimora.
Good evening. My name is Rebecca Hamilton, and I represent the Pedestrian Advisory Committee for the City of Portland. We have reviewed the TSP project list, and we've identified the projects on that list that represent our priorities as a committee. That list has already been submitted electronically, and I have a hard copy for your reference if you'd like, but I'll skip going through the list for time. This list reflects our committee's priorities regarding urban arterials, historically underserved areas of the city, and supporting 20-minute neighborhoods. The Pedestrian Advisory Committee would also like to note our support for the citywide programs, since many of the smaller projects make a big difference in filling the gaps in our pedestrian network. We also support the green transportation hierarchy, and we recommend that the city leave this in place and codify it in policy. We'd also like to express our strong support for the Vision Zero policy. We believe that using these principles to guide transportation investments is fundamental to supporting our most fundamental priorities of safety and accessibility for all citizens of Portland. And finally, we would also like to urge the city to update its 1998 pedestrian master plan with its own language prioritizing the needs of pedestrians for inclusion in the TSP update. Walking is the most fundamental mode of travel for all people. Consequently, pedestrian facilities must be included on all streets, regardless of classification. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Hello and good evening. My name is Jocelyn Gowdy. I'm here tonight representing the Portland Bicycle Advisory Committee. I first off just want to thank you all for the opportunity to comment on the TSP here. The Bicycle Advisory Committee appreciates your efforts to ensure the TSP is well aligned with the comprehensive plan update and with our shared goals for a safer, more equitable, and more sustainable network. Just want to note quickly that we've recently added 15 new members representing a diverse mixture of Portland's geography that includes every major section of the city, as well as a broad spectrum of interests and professional backgrounds. After careful review of the proposed update to the TSP and several meetings with PBOT staff, we asked the PSC to incorporate the following 4 comments and suggestions from our committee. Number 1, we support the inclusion of the transportation hierarchy in the TSP. This important policy tool will help prioritize the work of PBOT. Number 2, we support the inclusion of the bicycle transportation classifications from the Portland Bicycle Plan for 2030, which was unanimously approved by City Council in 2010. Number 3, we support the TSP project selection criteria as a transparent and effective means of translating the policy goals into an evaluation tool. Number 4, and maybe most importantly, we request that PBOT more clearly define which transportation projects would fall into the TSP programs categories from the TSP project list. This level of clarity is necessary for our committee and other stakeholders to properly evaluate PBOT's prioritization of network improvements. We recognize that limited resources are currently available for the projects outlined in the TSP. The Bicycle Advisory Committee has concerns that the overall project selection for the TSP constrained and unconstrained lists and how this aligns with the need to equitably distribute these projects throughout the city. We have identified 10 high priority projects out of the list of 290 currently listed, and we ask that the PSC and PBOT prioritize these projects as critical improvements. I won't
Thank
list
you.
them out, but they'll be included in our letter. Thank you very much for your time.
Great.
Good evening, members of the commission. My name is Arlene Kimura, and I live in East Portland, and I'm here as part of the East Portland Action Plan as well as the Hazelwood Neighborhood Association. First of all, the East Portland Coalition did submit a list of prioritized projects, but what I am here to talk about is some concerns I have. The EPAP-EPIM process that lists all the transportation projects for East Portland and priorities, we do not see it being fully incorporated into the current TSP listing. I share also with Marianne Fitzgerald and the Southwest neighborhoods that with the studies going on, there is no way to gauge impact on transportation with all of these corridors and center studies with the mixed-use zoning. And until we can actually have an outline of what those impacts are going to be to transportation, I think we have an incomplete plan. And my other concern is that in the process of doing outreach, you've talked about equity as a goal. I don't see it happening, not because of lack of trying, but because it's not a fast process. I live in a part of town that is almost 40% immigrant, refugee, and foreign-born. It takes a long time to get to know them, and maybe as a next step, more time and more effort needs to be built in. Those people are just as concerned about transportation impacts as anybody else. They just don't happen to speak English, nor do they have time to come to me. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have a real quick question about your EPAP comment. So it's EPAP's, I guess, testimony that your projects are not embedded in this transportation system.
We were told they were going to be, and they haven't been.
Okay.
And I don't know if the explanation is that they're in part of the program, but we haven't been able to get an answer on that.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next 3 are Jill Stats. Yes.
Can we ask staff to reconcile that difference for us?
Well, we will at
Thank
the
you.
end.
Just want to put that out there.
We're
now.
just yeah. Evan Moore, Ryan Bass. Jill, you want to get started?
Sure. Good evening, Chair Bao and members of the Commission. My name is Jill Statz. I'm a graduate student in Urban and Regional Planning at Portland State University and a member of the Community of Practice Best Practices Study Group. Our Community of Practice is currently looking at ways to offset public investment-induced gentrification and displacement. We understand the hearing tonight is on the transportation project list and associated policies. In your policies and action planning efforts, we would like to recommend 1, further assessing, and 2, mitigating unintended displacement impacts of transportation investments and associated land use actions. Specifically, we encourage you to strengthen and add detail to the impact analysis tool, which is introduced in Chapter 5 of the proposed draft, and to apply these improvements to the entire plan and associated investments. The impact analysis should assess added displacement pressure on existing low-income, elderly, and minority residents, including existing minority and other small businesses. The assessment should also address long-term impact on the affordability of housing and commercial space for low-income households, communities of color, and minority-owned businesses. We recommend that the city extend their efforts beyond analysis and ensure displacement impacts are proactively mitigated by utilizing anti-displacement measures to ensure the city's growth and development does not come at the expense of lower-income residents and minority populations. Providing stabilization and support for existing community members is imperative if we are to create a truly equitable, healthy, and prosperous future for everyone in the city of Portland. Thank you.
Thank you. Evan?
Hello, my name is Ryan Bass, and I'm a resident of the Bridal Mile neighborhood in Southwest Portland. Today, I'd like to advocate for 2 projects that were not approved and funded in the latest update to the Transportation System Plan: Southwest Shattuck Road pedestrian bike improvements and Southwest Hamilton pedestrian and bike improvements. Hamilton Road cuts through the middle of our neighborhood going east-west, and Shattuck goes through the middle going north-south, and both lack safe pedestrian access. And none of the other streets in our neighborhood have sidewalks either. For time's sake, I won't go into detail on Shattuck, but just to reiterate what David said earlier, we had approximately 60 comments on the map app in favor of that project. Regarding the Hamilton Street project, my family and many others desperately want sidewalks, at least one side of Hamilton Street. We want to be able to push a stroller with our 7-month-old to our local park. We want our kids to be able to walk to Bridal Mile Elementary School when they attend, so we don't have to drive 0.6 miles and clog up the parking lot and the air. We want to be able to walk, bike, and explore our neighborhood, and we want to be able to safely access transit. Most of those things we can't do, at least not safely currently. So why Hamilton? Why should it be reconsidered? First, as David mentioned, we received approximately 80 positive comments, the most of any transportation project, a huge percentage of the total of the 600 on the plan, so there's huge community support there. Second, the plan is to do, it was a $12 million project. And that would be great if we could have the full widening the streets, bike lanes, sidewalks, and everything. But what we really need is just a sidewalk on one side. That would be transformational for our neighborhood. Potentially bump it up in the score and maybe get something done this round. Also, TriMet is planning several route changes in Bridal Mile. Lanes 55 and 56 are being moved from east-west routes to north-south, and we need sidewalks in Hamilton so people can get to those changed bus routes. And in closing, I hope the city will reconsider approving and funding Hamilton Street in years 1 to 10 and Shattuck Road in 11 to 12. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Yvonne, right?
Avon. I'm reading for Avon. She had to leave early.
Okay.
So dear Chair Baugh and Planning and Sustainability Commissioners, my name is Avon Moore, and I have volunteered with the Community Alliance of Tenants for about 2.5 years. I have come to see that the protection of renters is essential to empowering and strengthening Portland's communities. Portland will grow and change over the next 20 years, and we believe for the better. Let's make sure that growth and change will not only benefit certain communities while negatively impacting low-income tenants, working families, communities of color, and our most vulnerable. When CAT provided postcards to people in our network and asked them to write down comments on the comprehensive plan, we collected 158 cards. Everyone who commented supports the general goal of having more affordable housing, and the majority of them had specific suggestions. Some of them include rent control, controlling water costs, just cause notices for evictions instead of the no-cause evictions that are currently legal, landlord certification and training, better fair housing protections, and many people commented that affordable housing should exist in every neighborhood throughout Portland, not just low-income neighborhoods. The Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, whether through this comprehensive plan or in other decision-making processes, can and will have an impact on affordability, rising rents, and displacement. At CAT, we look forward to working with the Commission and BPS to ensure and identify and acknowledge those decisions that have an impact on our most vulnerable populations. We need to work with tenant leaders and policy and planning experts alike to identify the right solutions so that everyone has a chance to live in the neighborhood of their choosing and people aren't forced out of the communities that they helped to build. Thank you.
And just, what is CAT?
CAT is the Community Alliance of Tenants, tenants' right organization
Thank
here
you.
in Portland.
Thank you. Rayhana Ansari, Leah Gray, Don Bach. Rayhana?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Chair Ba, Commissioners. Rayhana Ansari here on behalf of the Portland Business Alliance. The Alliance is committed to improving the region's multimodal transportation infrastructure, advocating for strong transportation policies and projects that encourage job growth, livability, and prosperity. Our most recent Value of Jobs report on the cost of congestion, of which I have copies here to share, shows how dependent our economy and in particular traded sector businesses are on an efficient and reliable transportation network. As we have shown in past Value of Jobs reports, export-related jobs pay on average 18% more than non-exporting jobs across sectors. We therefore appreciate the addition of economic benefit criteria for opportunity access, and freight mobility to help prioritize projects that offer the greatest opportunity for quality middle-income jobs. While we understand that it is not an exact science, we are concerned about the disproportionate funding levels proposed among different modes. Such a vast difference infers a prioritization of modes as opposed to projects, and a shift away from a multimodal system that would encourage job growth, livability, and prosperity. That said, I was pleased to see Mark Lear's earlier slide on freight revenue and constrained costs, and it's possible that his parsing out of locally led projects begins to address this issue, so I'll follow up with him on his breakdown of numbers. Given limited resources, those projects that demonstrate the greatest potential return for the least investment should be prioritized. For example, projects that add traffic lights and synchronize signals help improve traffic flow at a comparatively low cost and should therefore be prioritized. Another example is the comparison of project numbers 20068 and 20077. The former project would replace an existing bridge that serves trucks, cars, pedestrian, and bikes for $9.7 million versus the estimated $8.3 million to build a new bridge serving only pedestrian and bicycles. The additional $1.4 million for the former project is a better return on investment given that it serves trucks, cars, pedestrian, and bikes versus only 2 transportation modes. In general, these projects will increase access to vacant and underutilized industrial lands, including traded sector facilities, while increasing access to middle-income jobs. They also provide increased capacity for all modes. Is that it? Okay. We'll provide written comment on our specific priorities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. It's the first time I've been before you guys. So my name is Leah Gray. I live in East County. I am a member of the Community Alliance of Tenants and also the East Portland Action Plans Housing Committee. I am a renter and have been most of my life. I live in Section 8 housing and I live in substandard housing, although it's only 11 or 12 years old. I am disabled. I live on Social Security. I get $735 a month. I pay $238 in rent and $100 on my electric bill, which means I pay a little more than half of my income for housing. Right now, because I'm diabetic, I get vision and dental, which I'm very fortunate to have. I'm also at risk of losing my housing because I've had problems with my management company and the owners in terms of repairs. I've spent 4 years without heat in my apartment. I've had to go and buy heaters so that I could have heat in my apartment. They finally repaired the unit. It wasn't broken, it just needed maintenance. This has become a strategy for gentrification and displacement, and I've seen it in my own apartment complex. They refuse to repair things, they neglect things, the repairs that they do are inadequate, things get worse, they evict the person, they repair it, and then raise the rents. So, you know, the Housing Bureau is working on this, but the problem is if we don't tie immediate financial stuff to the violations, they shouldn't have to wait 30 days. If I get a ticket, I don't get 30 days to figure it out, or I got to pay the ticket. And I think that's exactly what needs to happen with the renters and realtors, the owners. They know the law. Thank you.
Thank you. Don?
Hi, I'm Don Bach. I live in Hillsdale. I'm an AARP representative on the Transportation Experts Group. I'm on the PAC, Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and I chair Southwest Trails. I'm here to talk about a number of things. So there's a testimony came into you from Laura Foster. I urge you to read that because she's got a perspective across the city of transportation needs and so on. She actually walks the trails and she's written about them, and I think you ought to look at that pretty carefully. The reason in the Southwest a lot of things are expensive is not only because of terrain, but we've got 42% of our streets are substandard, meaning no sidewalks. We have 15% of sidewalks across Southwest. Now that's far worse than any other part of the city, by any way you measure it. On trails, I want to thank you. I think I want to thank you. I presume you guys are the guys that made the decision to say, hey, we pulled this out of the 8-point whatever it was and put it into transportation. You know, it just made no sense the helter-skelter way it was. I appreciate that. However, we've still got a lot of talking going on with staff. There's been no input from the public and from, you know, those of us. We really want to make sure that there's a branch for a sit-down discussion of how this is being structured for trails, bikeways, greenways, a whole thing, because it's complicated. We really want to make sure that the greenways are applicable to transportation for pedestrians, because reducing the speed limits when we're walking on the street is really, really important. I won't get into that further. I sent you independent testimony on the red electric. It's got a lot of details in there. You need to read them. I don't want to go through it right here again. But a couple things that I want to say, Mike, you talked about costs of doing things when bureaus work together. Trails has worked for 10 years to get the PBOT and BES to work together. Maplewood Road was the first time they actually worked together to do an extended shoulder, which cost $500,000 a mile, compared to estimated for Capitol Highway sidewalks, 2 sides, bike lanes, and all the stormwater of $20.7 million a mile. Big difference, and we can do a lot of extended shoulders for minor dollars, but you got to make sure we make the way to make that happen. And, you know, a lot of that's going to fall into the citywide kinds of things, but, you know, those things are really, really important. And it's finally, there's a lot of need to focus on the Markham Hill Road. It's the 4T, and economic development. I've tried to get the economic considerations to consider that. Basically, it's a tourist attraction. We get 70,000 hits last year on our 4T site, which we maintain as Southwest Trails.
Thank you.
It's huge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jason Franklin, Mike Connors, Kat Ganor. Was that close? Kat's not here. Christina Palacios. Palacios. She's coming.
You gotta work on it.
Jason, you want to get started?
Sure. Good evening. I'm Jason Franklin. I'm the Director of Campus Planning at Portland State University. Thanks for the opportunity to testify tonight. Just turned off my notes. So as you probably know, Portland State University is one of the largest employers in downtown. and it probably arguably generates the most pedestrian, bicycle, and transit trips in the city, if not the state. 40% of our students, the recent freshman class, are students of color, with many students from lower income households or first generation folks going to college. While, as everyone knows, we have great transit service in the University District and generally in South Downtown, pedestrian and bicycle safety and access is actually quite lacking in the district. And unfortunately, the draft TSP does little to address these concerns within the University District or South Downtown area. I certainly appreciate the work the staff has done on this plan, but the process that PBOT undertook just didn't allow the time, I feel personally, for the appropriate involvement for downtown stakeholders, including Portland State University. And while much of the transportation infrastructure is in place in downtown, there are ongoing needs for both the existing populations that are here, as well as new folks that are going to be welcoming to downtown as part of growth and expansion of the downtown area. This is particularly evident in the context of the Southwest Quadrant Plan, which is now being considered by City Council. In particular, in the University District, there are two projects that have funding sources and should be included in the TSP. These projects I urge you to include, and they have 50% of their funding provided through the Innovation Quadrant Transportation System Development Charge. One is the completion of the Broadway cycle track and streetscape, and the second one is Southwest 4th Avenue streetscape. These are two relatively inexpensive projects and provide significant multimodal benefits, and I believe meet PBOT's criteria for inclusion in the TSP. These projects have been adopted by the city, provide significant safety improvements, are economically effective, and from an equity perspective, serve a very diverse population. In short, they meet multiple benefits. Given the available funding match and the benefits of these projects, I urge their inclusion in the draft TSP. Thank you.
Thank you. Christina?
Thank you for having me here. My name is Cristina Palacios, and I work for the Community Alliance of Tenants, a renters' rights organization. I've been doing community organizing for 8 years, going and meeting people where they live. I door knock with 11 volunteers on February the 7th, 200 doors. And we were talking to them about displacement. We were talking about the comprehensive plan. And what you see out there, people are confused. They don't know what the comprehensive plan is or how it's going to affect them in 20 years from now. So I'm here to ask you to please consider reaching out to the people that don't know about those events and be accessible to them, because I brought in several tenants to talk about their housing situation. Housing is a very important piece when we talk about a 20-year plan. Housing should be priority number one. We should not be leaving people wondering if there's going to be remodeling the streets or if there's going to be new buildings, and they live in very substandard conditions that most of the time the landlords are going to torn down. So I'm going to tell you 3 samples really quick, because I know I'm going to be running out of time. When we door knock in North Portland, there is a building there that has radon. The tenants cannot move because they cannot afford to pay. And if that building, there is 200 tenants, 98% are Latinos. Latinos are going to be having cancer in 40 years from now. So my request to you is to pay attention to people's housing needs. In East Portland, there is apartment complexes that the buildings are collapsing. There is people that are getting evicted when they ask for repairs. And if there is not enough housing so we can keep them where they live and we don't enforce housing codes, they're going to keep pushing out and keep pushing out. And at the end, I don't know if the comprehensive plan is really going to address Title VI. So Title VI is very important for people of colors. It's one of the tools that it should be used. And I shouldn't be asking here to comply with Title VI, because I know you care. And I also want to thank you and finish this to say that from the first meeting that I went to in East Portland, there was a petition that I made that you provide interpretation services to some of the hearings, and there has been some effort from the city to provide language access. So thank you for doing that. I feel comfortable coming here and ask you about tenants protections and ask you to provide safe, affordable housing for all. And in here are the 158 postcards that Ivan was telling you about, so you know that we're doing the groundwork, but we like you to be with us and walk in our shoes. Thank you.
Mike.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Mike Connors with Hathaway Kobach Connors, and I'm here on behalf of Hayden Island Enterprises, the owners and operators of Hayden Island Mobile Home Community. We submitted a letter, additional comments dated February 18th, addressing the TSP issue I'm going to testify about today in Section C of that letter. It's a fairly specific issue, and that is we're objecting to the proposal to remove the North Hayden Island Drive reconstruction project from the project list, and that's RTP 11632. The primary basis for our objection is it's inconsistent with the way the city has treated other aspects of the West Hayden Island annexation. The TSP proposes to remove this project on the basis that the annexation of West Hayden Island has been withdrawn. And yet, as this commission knows, with respect to BPS staff's recommendation on the comprehensive plan, they're proposing that you designate West Hayden Island industrial. They're proposing that you adopt policy 6.41, recognizing the future marine terminal development, notwithstanding the fact that that's been withdrawn. And keep in mind that this North Hayden Island Drive reconstruction project is one of the mitigation measures that this commission adopted after that very extensive public process. Additionally, in the TSP itself, there are projects linked to the same West Hayden Island port project that are remaining. Where is it? West Hayden Island rail yard expansion and the rail access are designated in the project to serve future marine terminal development. So from our perspective, it's an all or nothing. If the city is going to have in the comp plan and the TSP policies and projects that specifically recognize the future marine development, then it should include this project as well. And if it's going to remove this project, you should remove all aspects of it, which is our preference. And that's in our comment letter. But you shouldn't recognize it and then withdraw one of the mitigation measures that was part of the effort of this commission. Secondarily, it also serves an independent function, notwithstanding the West Hayden Island project, and that is that both the West Hayden Island concept plan and the port terminal project itself recognize that there are some transportation needs in this area. This particular road is the major access for the west side of the island. It's below standards. And so for that reason, we think that those improvements are necessary. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Jim Howell, Jessica Engelman, and Jackie Conley. Jim, you want to get started?
My name is Jim Howell. I am passing around 2 pictures, and understand each picture is worth 1,000 words, so I won't speak those words. You can look at them and we can talk about them later. There are basically 2 projects that are not in this list that should be in there. One is a long-range look at light rail. We're going to be in gridlock in downtown the next 20 to 30 years, and neither TriMet nor Metro have really come up with a solution to that problem. The other has to do with the streetcar. It's a modest streetcar improvement that should be looked at, I'd say, instead of possibly some of the corridors on the east side that are going to be studied with $6 million, I think you have. What I'd like to spend the rest of my time on is talking about funding. As you know, our state constitution prohibits the use of transportation money for bicycle or transit projects, in spite of what Terry says. And there is a bill at the legislature, it's SJR 16, that would refer to the voters the opportunity to change this bit of the Constitution in the next general election. And I just want you all to be aware of it and hopefully support it when it comes up for committee. And I think I made it under, I still have a green light, so.
Well, no, if you're done, we'll move on. It's getting late.
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Jessica Engelman. I'm a resident of Hosford Abernathy. I think the city is on track for some really amazing changes to shift away from private vehicle-oriented transit system to one that promotes cycling, walking, and public transit, and I think we should all be really proud and excited. I would like to highlight a few areas I think require extra consideration. One, when it comes to cycling and walking, I think we should focus on catering to the, quote, interested but concerned populace, because cyclists and pedestrians alike, there is safety and comfort in numbers, and the more people we can get out of cars and onto the bike lanes and sidewalks, the more people will follow. This specifically means that before adding to the network, we should improve the gaps and weak points in the system, such as difficult intersections, and places where the bike lane drops off or feels less safe, and also strengthening what we already have, such as improving bridge crossings, adding buffers to bike lanes, and doing more bike-friendly transit calming on greenways, such as diversion rather than speed bumps. 2, in creating a walkable, livable, sustainable Portland, I think on-street parking is going to be one of the biggest contention points. Every block with on-street parking could instead be a buffered bike lane, a wider sidewalk, a parklet, or a bioswale. And making parking expensive and rare rather than cheap and plentiful at popular destinations is also a great way to sway people away from private vehicles and towards more greener alternatives. I know that taking away parking is unpopular, but keeping it is in direct opposition of the green transportation hierarchy and makes me question the city's dedication to that hierarchy. I'd also add that public transit should be faster and more reliable. Bike share, really glad to hear that's getting off the ground. And I would finally like to specifically state my support for the Green Loop cycling and walking path proposal, although I'm hoping you can come up with a snazzier name for it.
Work on that. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jacqueline Conley, and I'm here on behalf of Gladstone Square Tenant Association. It's a property east of 82nd in the Powellhurst-Gilbert neighborhood, and it's between Powell and Holgate. We first would like to say we are hugely in support of the anti-displacement recommendations that have been made, but we would like to share our story with you. We began organizing tenants after becoming aware that management was not providing maintenance to homes that put neighbors in danger. I personally have lived in Portland for 19 years, and for the first time, I'm living in east of 82nd. I'm outraged at the treatment I've seen at my property, and I'm especially outraged by the lack of respect for community members who are Latino and Spanish speaking. I have met with residents who have stovetops that do not work on their stoves, and they are told by management it's because they make too many tamales and too much pozole. We, as a tenant association, first met in the summer, and we had our first meeting in a laundry room. We now have access to our community room. We have met with CAT, which is Community Alliance of Tenants, and through that we have funded a lot of letters to agencies as well as our management asking for repairs to be made. We asked for our city inspector to come to our residence on September 24th, and he is great city inspector. He recently just came to our residence the beginning of February. We, as tenants, have been harassed by our management company in asking for these repairs. Tenants have been threatened with deportation. They've been threatened with ICE. They have been threatened by not only the management company, but by other tenants being held in this place to hold fear over others. We have asked that the management company make repairs that are also in code violation that create huge safety issues. Recently, we had a Northwest Natural representative respond to our property, and he detected a CO2 leak, which is due to the known code violation. Northwest Natural emphasized how fortunate the family was to be alive. Management still has not taken any action on the other 48 units. The harassment continues, and the community still lives in unsafe conditions and in fear. We recently had our city inspector come, and the site violations have all been noted by him. That's why I'm here tonight, is to urge this commission to not only increase, but to provide affordable housing in this plan, but to also increase programs that provide outreach and education to tenants to inform them of their rights, to not only request repairs, but to contact police when they are victims of crime, and to do so and not fear retaliation. Often in life, we don't know why we end up in the situations we do, and for the first time, I know why I'm living east of 82nd. It's to give a voice to the tenants that live in my community that for far too long have believed change was not achievable and that they did not matter. And I'll leave you with this, that as a community member of Portland for a very long time, I will say all members of my community, no matter their color or what language they speak, not only matter, but they deserve equality. They deserve respect, and they deserve to be heard in the discussions of our great city of Portland.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One quick question. Jim, you disappointed me. I was sure you were going to tell us to take the CRC out of the TSP.
Hey, it's dead. Let's face it. Why do you have it in there?
Andrea Herman, Brian Poswit, and Edward Hill. I think we only got about 10 left. Andrea's not here. Danelle Norby. Go ahead, Brian.
Want me to go first?
It doesn't matter, just one of you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Brian Pozowitz. I am the chair of the Transportation Committee for the Selwood Moreland Neighborhood Association, which is known by its acronym SMILE. The Transportation Committee and the SMILE Board discussed the list of projects that were in the list for the Southeast Uplift area, the list of transportation projects. And after those discussions, the SMILE Board unanimously voted to send me here tonight to give you a couple of comments. Number one, SMILE strongly supports the Reedway pedestrian bike overcrossing, which is number 70049. We're happy to see that project prioritized as on the financially constrained list and to have a specific time frame. Second of all, SMILE strongly supports the Tacoma Main Street improvements, which we understand to be a project to make Tacoma Street a more pedestrian-friendly street. That's number 70055. We're disappointed that project does not have a higher priority. It's not on the constrained list, and there is no specific time frame. These next couple of comments get a little specific, but I want to be sure to carry out my charge here. So on the Southeast 13th Avenue streetscape improvements, which is number 70001, SMILE would like to see that project, if it's completed, include some additional designated pedestrian crossings on Southeast 13th north of Tacoma. Well, that's a complaint we hear often in our neighborhood, is that it's too hard to cross 13th in some areas, in particular at Lambert Street. Second, regarding the outer Milwaukee Avenue streetscape improvements, number 70042, that project basically ends where Milwaukee Avenue hits Southeast 17th. We'd like to see it extended south of Tacoma on 17th, and also to include some additional designated pedestrian crossings between Umatilla Street and Lynn Street. We hear that a lot in the neighborhood too. It's too hard to cross 17th. Finally, the SMILE Board was really concerned not to see on the list for Southeast Uplift a project to close the Selwood Gap in the Springwater Corridor. As I think all of you know, the corridor ends at Umatilla Street on one end and picks up again at 19th and Ochco. And I was coming here to express that concern, but while I was waiting to testify, I saw that it's in a separate list for funded projects and has a 10-year time horizon, which I take to mean is even better than being in the financially constrained list. So that's a very, very high priority for the neighborhood, and thank you for the chance to testify.
Thank you. Edward?
Hello? Push. Yes. Thank
There you
you.
go.
Okay. Thank you for this opportunity, Commissioners. My name is Edward Hill, and I'm an urban planner and community engagement specialist. Full disclosure, I'm currently working as a consultant for projects with PBOT and Metro, working in diverse community engagement projects with them. Speaking today as a resident of North Portland and participant in the rebuilding of Black community in the Portland metro area. There's an urgency. Transportation in its most modern form is deeply integrated into healthy communities, transit-oriented development, and green development, i.e. bike paths, greenways, et cetera. And it is identified that significant transit improvements and street improvements are often tied to big investments and redevelopment areas where historical patterns of planning have created marginalization, segregation, isolation, and limited access to the city and its full growth and benefits. Serial displacement of low-income communities and communities of color in the name of new urbanism, transit-oriented development, and healthy communities, as well as urban renewal in divested urban cores is a problem. This is a public health crisis, which will require creative and innovative solutions to redress and mitigate and reverse its deleterious effects. A truly equitable and inclusive approach to rebuilding and stabilizing community is vital. Urgency is now, and at this time, the books are open as we review the comp plan. This includes the TSP. There are 50 pages, over 50 pages in the Albina plan that were agreed upon, adopted by the city, and added to the original comp plan in 1993, then abandoned during the hyper-investment of Akira, and that inclusion of the abridged version should remain with the implementation guidance by the people and the planners in the next iteration of the comp plan. It is recommended that the full Albina community plan, along with the integration of other community-driven plans and framing, and strategy, and action items be implemented and prioritized as a way to ensure that Black community members from the north to the numbers have the opportunity to access the prosperity of the region and the goals and visions of the 2035 plan. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for the record, I did not plan that. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Danelle Norby. I'm a North Portland resident, and I'm here representing Housing Land Advocates. The transportation policies under discussion tonight may improve quality of life for low-income residents by increasing access to jobs and services and lowering transportation costs. However, such benefits can only be experienced by residents with access to the healthy, connected neighborhoods that Portland seeks to create. It's the unfortunate reality, as we know, that well-intentioned investments often increase housing costs and displacement risk for low-income people and communities of color. For this reason, HLA supports inclusion in the comp plan of the 11 anti-displacement measures put forward tonight. I'll briefly discuss two. First, we urge the city to use land banking as an affordable housing tool. The comp plan outlines policies to preserve diversity, mitigate displacement, and provide housing in high-opportunity neighborhoods. What it lacks is an acknowledgement of the role that increasing land values will play in achieving or failing to meet those goals, as well as a mechanism to ensure that land remains available for affordable housing in locations of opportunity. Land-banked properties acquired with existing or new funding sources or drawn from underutilized public lands could be used by the city and nonprofit partners to provide permanently affordable housing in desirable neighborhoods over the long term. Second, we ask the city to include affordable units in new market rate projects. Considering efforts to repeal the statewide ban, we echo Commissioner Saltzman's concerns that failure to include provisions for mandatory inclusionary zoning in the comp plan could result in a missed opportunity. Conversely, if the ban is not overturned, the city should be prepared to create aggressive incentives for voluntary inclusion of affordable units. HLA and other members of the Anti-Displacement Coalition would be happy to work with the city to explore inclusionary zoning language and land banking models. We feel strongly that the proposed measures before you tonight would help lay the foundation for a more equitable Portland. Thank you.
Thank you. And just, Edward, earlier there was a conversation about historical plans and being and the incorporation into the.
Here we go.
Planners. You're on point tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Laura Young, Anita Yap, Todd Stubble.
I think Laura already testified earlier with the Coley Alliance.
Okay. W.R., is it Granger? James Lopez Erickson. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Ba and members of the commission. My name's Anita Yap, and I'm here representing the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon, better known as APANO, and also a member of the JADE International District Steering Committee out there, way out there in 82nd Division. I wanted to thank you for having us. Also, appreciation for your staff. They've come out and talked with us quite a bit about the comp plan, and we appreciate that engagement in particular. Also want to mention that the J District where we are living, where I live, is one of the most diverse areas in the state, most diverse zip code in the state of Oregon. So when we talk about anti-displacement and community benefits, you know, it's not one size fits all. We have such a diverse community, and the things in particular that I'm really concerned about is displacement of businesses in particular. We have a lot of small businesses. We've already seen it already with the expansion of the PCC campus, which we think is wonderful, but we lost a major icon for a lot of our Asian community at the Legion building. You know, they wanted to sell, right, but it's still displacement of a wonderful community asset. We lost the Kaiser Clinic, which was a local medical clinic. Again, they wanted to sell, it was a lease, but still, there's this whole component of, you know, letting the market run these sort of things. So what I'm going to say is that you're going to hear a lot about anti-displacement strategies, community benefits agreements. So what I want to talk about a little bit from my perspective as a planner is a little bit of the mechanics and suggest ways that you can look at it. So there's two in particular. One is related to transportation improvements. As you mostly know, right-of-way improvements, especially done by public agencies, don't necessarily always fall under land use planning policies. But I would like to suggest that within the comp plan policies, the TSP policies in particular, that you figure out a mechanism that you're able to do that and relate the community benefits in particular for those kind of improvements out there. I think if you went to the Governing for Racial Equity conference that we had, I think a couple years ago here in Portland, San Francisco Utilities talked about a really good model about how they do that. So I know there's staff at Portland City of Portland was a major partner in that, so that would be a great one to explore as a mechanism. And the other one I want to talk about is the two map system in particular, the comprehensive plan map and the zoning map. I think there's a really great and elegant opportunity to really fine-tune how we look at displacement, not only for residential, but business as well. So I understand that there's going to be some changes to the comp plan with this review, and I'm not quite sure yet if the zoning map is going to be changed at the same time, and I would suggest you don't do that. I would suggest you put policies in the comprehensive plan map, and talking about the implementation of that, really it has to do with when the neighborhoods are ready. I'm thinking of some readiness criteria that you set up the community benefits and anti-displacement policies and strategies before any zone changes happen, before any development can happen in any of these neighborhoods, that you figure this out. There's probably a good time lag that can happen, but I think
Thank you.
that would be something. So, for instance, in the J District, that's
I think
what we'd like to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good evening, Chairman Bao, Commissioners. My name is Todd Struble, and I'm the J District Manager of the MPI program. First, I wanted to appreciate and recognize that equity is a core value of the comprehensive plan. As Anita was mentioning, we are the most diverse census tract in the city of Portland. We're also low income. 88% of the students at the local school are on free or reduced lunch. And we're one of those communities that you hear a lot about that's underserved in terms of infrastructure. We're one of those communities that doesn't have sidewalks and paved roads. We also know that there's a lot of investment coming with the Powell Division Transit Project and the 82nd Avenue. There's improvements going along there. But we also want to say that there's unique challenges that go along in the J District. Our community struggles with different issues than Coley, even though, you know, kind of anti-displacement is the same theme. Things that work in Coley may not work in the J District. However, we've done community outreach, and I want to point out 3 tools that we have identified that would help our neighborhood. First is, again, that 82nd Avenue corridor, working with the state of Oregon to transfer jurisdiction of 82nd to the city of Portland to implement those local policies that would help anti-displacement. And we know that costs money, but we were encouraging you to work as much as you can to expedite that process. Second Metro purchased a landmark in our neighborhood, the furniture store, the vacant furniture store. That's going to be a TOD program. And we'd like to encourage you to work with Metro and assist us in helping maintain that as affordable housing and hopefully create some community space, as community space is a need that our community has identified is really important to them. Finally, green space. If you can think of that big block between Powell and Division, 82nd and 205, there's absolutely no green space whatsoever in there. We've also recognized that there's a high density of youth, and these are communities of color. And just to kick a soccer ball around, they have to make one of those dangerous crossings. So I saw in the high crash impact, that's our neighborhood was on there. So those are some of the tools that would really help our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is James Lopez Erickson. My family and I are residents in the Portsmouth neighborhood. I first want to acknowledge the work of this commission and the amazing testimonies that have come before me, because it's obvious that there are so many community members working at many different levels to try and address the issues that they've talked about tonight. And I just want to first acknowledge that any community forum on displacement and gentrification which does not address racism will only benefit white folks. So I know that racism has been part of the testimonies tonight, and I hope it is part of the policy procedures in place for the dialogues needed moving forward. One thing that I have been trying to brainstorm and put together to meet displacement and gentrification at its core, this would just be one of the many ideas that I've heard tonight, so this wouldn't solve everything. It would be a historical and cultural connection flyer. This would be a requirement given to all prospective business owners and those seeking to buy or lease or rent. This flyer would provide information on history of the neighborhood, share about ways businesses and residents can connect with the neighborhood. I see so many residents, business owners moving in, and their anticipatory responses were looking to invest for those who we want to move in. We aren't necessarily doing the work to make sure that those who already live in the neighborhood can reap the benefits. And so I think just as it would be irresponsible to send someone to Alaska without sending them with a coat or any information on the culture or the environment, I think it's just as irresponsible to move into a neighborhood or bring in a business to a neighborhood without giving them some tools about its history, the people, and the environment.
Great. Thank you. W.R. Grogan?
Right here, it's Grogan, Grogan.
Okay, you're up.
I can't read it either.
Veronica Lopez Erickson, Pamela Fawn.
Veronica, she's my wife. She was unable.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay. You need to fill out a card. So do you have a card?
But it's her statement. Already filled out a card. I'm reading for someone.
Oh, okay. So you're reading. Who are you reading for?
Oh, sorry, Raquel Valle.
Raquel.
V-A-L-L.
I don't have a Raquel.
You might want to ask your student.
Okay, so go ahead and fill one out and sit down and testify. Yeah, go ahead and start.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Rick Grogan. I live in downtown Portland. I live in a building that's 220 square feet. I call it a room with a loo. It used to be subsidized years ago, and now it claims to be low rent, although I've been there for 7 years now. The rent has increased 43% since I've moved there. And now it was an average of about 5.2%. This last January, 5 months, it used to be year-to-year, on a year-to-year rent basis. The new manager of the building, but it comes from the company Home Forward, decided in their infinite wisdom to say that the verbal agreements by the previous manager that he was doing because they would not offer leases, just verbal agreements. The company says those verbal agreements are no longer valid. They raised the rent 4.3%. As I said, that was January 1st. A notice we got 3 weeks ago, that starting with April of this year, they're raising their rent again another 11.7%, which brings for a total for this year of 16% in raises. In my particular case and others, we were given a verbal agreement there'd be no rent raises for this year, although it's 16% this year in our rent raise. The reason they said, again, was not, and I know, I'm not an idiot. I know that you should get this stuff in writing. I've been there long enough. The manager was good enough to do this, apparently, but too good because he was fired, as it turned out. But still, in effect, and they know, the company knows, Home Forward knows exactly what went on. They know he gave these verbal agreements, and they still won't enforce them, and he knows that. They know that. But again, 16% raise, and I don't have an average. I've looked to find some kind of a reasonable downtown average for rent raises that's within the realm of possibility. I know inflation is, under 1%. I know housing costs are, well above that in this town. I know the pressures. I listen to this. I read things in the newspaper. But 16% for a 224 square foot room with no kitchen, I might add, community kitchen on the first floor, no improvements, I think is a little steep.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it. Thanks for your ears.
Good evening. My name is Pam Fawn, and I'm with 1,000 Friends of Oregon, which is a statewide land use organization that provides, sure, that provides advocacy to ensure that our statewide land use program stays intact and also supports livability around the state. And I'm here on behalf of 1,000 Friends as a part of the larger coalition that brought you those policy recommendations with regard to the anti-displacement work. We came together as a group very quickly to think about kind of some of the outcomes that communities are experiencing and to see if we could put our heads together about options that currently the city may not be considering or are considering, and we'd like to collaborate with the Planning and Sustainability Commission as well as with staff to figure out how we can make them possible for the city. And so 1,000 Friends particularly, we're curious and really encouraged by kind of the policies that you've already expressed in the proposed draft as well as in the TSP around kind of compact and walkable neighborhoods. We feel like the promise of smart growth is very true and that there's a way to do it equitably. And so we're here at the table to ensure that vision can be possible. And so we're in full support. We stand united behind communities of color, Black communities, as well as tenant communities around some of the things that they're looking to do. And so, and some of the specific technical pieces that we're excited about is to have a great conversation about, what we can do with infill, encouraging the compactness that we'd all like to see, where there's enough residents in an area to feed the high capacity transit we're hoping to create, the network we're hoping to create, as well as some of these other pieces around, ensuring that inclusionary housing is happening as that infill comes in. So it's our hope that, we can continue the conversation and that this is not the last. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I am reading on behalf of Raquel Valle. Hi, my name is Raquel Valle, and I am a resident in outer Southeast Portland. In August of 2014, I began organizing a tenants association at my property with other residents at Gladstone Square. We began organizing to get repairs done, but to also get attention to tenant-on-tenant harassment. I work as a much-needed Spanish interpreter to my community. I do this free of charge because I know the importance in providing people information to be able to stand up for themselves, especially people in my Latino community. In October of 2014, I received a letter from Cascade with allegations made towards me that were false and untrue. I believe this was retaliation for aiding and organizing my community to address harassment issues and maintenance issues. We have sent many letters with the assistance of Community Alliance of Tenants. Still, we have many repairs that have not been completed. Earlier this month, a CO2 leak was detected in our home. This would not have happened if the repairs would have been made when requested. The management does not do anything to help tenants, and they allow other tenants to use racial hate speech and threaten members in my community. I have been called names, threatened, and threatened and watched other residents threatened even with deportation or ICE. The management company not only does not protect us with repairs that could be harmful, they also allow tenants to remain on the property that attack people who are organizing to make it better and safer. They allow people to be attacked for the color of their skin and the language they speak. Things have been getting way out of hand, and they have heightened and even increased over the last month. We recently had a city inspector come to the property, and since then, one of our community members was given a 10-day notice. I do not want to be afraid to leave my little sister and mom at home to go and follow my dreams and continue my education. I do not want to worry they will be attacked for trying to make our home better. I don't like racism. I don't like to be judged for my color or being Hispanic or speaking Spanish. My family worked hard to get here. We should not be allowed to be attacked in the place where we live. We need more affordable housing in Portland so people have options. We need more programs to provide education to the community and assist in outreach, especially in my Latino community. People should not be afraid to ask for repairs or to contact the police if they are victims of crimes. Thank you for your attention, and I support the displacement recommendations.
Thank you. Last two, again, if there's anybody else.
My building also is Cascade Management.
Oh, okay.
For the record.
Thank you. Last two, if there's anybody else that wishes to testify, please fill out a card. Pia Welch and Tabitha Bichetti. Tabitha, you want to get started?
Oh, absolutely. Good evening. I'm Tabitha Boschetti, speaking for a group of PSU students who conducted a project to examine the influence of streetscape improvements, zoning decisions, and possible community benefits tied to development. Our project highlighted outcomes related to displacement and neighborhood change in a person's life in the 20 years between now and 2035. Using North Fessenden in St. John's as our study area, we examined 5 possible scenarios, including the streetscape investments, where the street was zoned either more residential or more commercial, and where different community benefits were adopted, ranging from nothing different than today to full-on inclusionary zoning, but also in a more moderate middle, IDAs, small business grants, things like that. We ran 4 fictional characters through these scenarios, 5-year-old Jackson, 15-year-old Lonnie, 40-year-old Denise, and 65-year-old Patty. Lonnie, a 9th grade student, is bright but has challenges in her home life. In scenarios where redevelopment prompts displacement, Lonnie loses access to a mentor who otherwise encourages her to apply for scholarship opportunities. Lacking social networks, the bullying she faces as a queer youth becomes more difficult and prompts her to miss school. These changes stifle her career path, and while she becomes an independent adult, she has financial struggles and limited resources to care for her as her mother ages. These stories get really long. It's way too long for 2 minutes. But the summary of our project is that proposals that minimize displacement can foster stability in ways that influence our school system, public health, community support between neighbors, and family budgets. Long-range planning, can of course become about, what this urban form is today, but it can also be about how a 15-year-old of today is doing when they're 35. If you have time to read our stories, they are at futurefessenden.wordpress.com, but I understand you're busy. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. And Julie, do you have that link? Great, thanks.
Chairman Bao and Commissioners, thank you for your time. I'll be brief, only 2 paragraphs, as we have sent you a letter in the past, and we'll be sending you another letter. My name is Pia Welch. I'm the Vice Chair of the Portland Freight Committee. I am on my 3rd committee in relationship to the Comprehensive Plan, which is a very important document. First comment is on the transportation hierarchy. While we understand the transportation hierarchy has been revised from its original proposal, the Climate Action Plan and 2030 Bike Plan, much confusion still remains on its overall intent and which street classifications it would be applied to. It's also unclear on the overall utility of the hierarchy in addressing policy conflicts or how it will be applied at the project development and design levels. Since most Portland street corridors are multifunctional, street design is based on the context sensitivity of the surrounding land uses and connecting transportation network. As currently proposed, it's unclear how the hierarchy would help resolve classification conflicts and competing modal needs. Unless otherwise clarified how it will be applied, the PFC Portland Freight Committee recommends that the hierarchy be excluded from major and priority truck streets and designated freight district streets. In order to help guide PBOT in prioritizing modes when making transportation investment and design decisions, the Portland Freight Committee supports the concepts identified in the Vancouver, BC Transportation 2040 Plan. Goods movement, along with safety and emergency vehicles, is intentionally excluded from the Vancouver's model hierarchy due to the recognition of the importance of freight to the local economy and is treated more as a function of the overall transportation system like it is for emergency vehicles. The PFC believes that Vancouver 2040 Plan serves as a good model and will continue working with the other modal committees and PBOT staff to craft a more workable and effective decision-making tool that reflects all the modal needs. We also have some project lists that we'll send you. We have more research to do on them because some things weren't clear, and you'll get that in our typed comments. Don't want to take up any more of your time. Our other comment was on the TSP project selection criteria, which we would like to see more work done on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick question on this Vancouver thing. Did freight end up getting more money because of that classification out of that?
No, not necessarily. And we've provided all the information on this to PBOT staff and Commissioner Novak. They have a different way of planning their system. They don't have freeways going through the city like we do. They have arterials. And so they watch and they time their freight movement arterials, and they don't believe in putting other things on those because it presents a conflict. So they do their bike planning separate and things like that. So it doesn't necessarily mean more money, although in talking to the Vancouver BC staff, they said that they had to change their way of thinking because they had to recognize in order for the city to have money, they had to keep the economy viable. And the transportation of goods is the basics to keeping an economy viable.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Again, is there anybody else that would wish to testify tonight? Please come up and testify. If not, that closes the oral testimony for the Transportation Systems Plan testimony. You can still provide written testimony, not only in the Transportation Systems Plan maps, but through March 13th, 2015, and that's written testimony, not only of this, but the entire comp plan. If we could have staff come back up, we're going to go around the room for a quick kind of somebody is tired. Let's start at this end. Well, no, not the quick end, but it's 3 or 4 minutes, and I think it's more. We have again March 10th coming back for a work session, so there's probably topics in areas that are going to be similar. Yeah, Joe.
And just that March 10th work session is the same meeting we're covering housing and gentrification. So some of those topics will overlap that you heard tonight.
So if we can give them topics, if you have very detailed kind of questions, if you can get those to Julie and she'll pass them on to staff. But I think topics and themes is where we're going to have to end up tonight to get out of here by 9. Michelle.
Okay, so I'll be quick. I am looking forward to seeing the maps we talked about earlier, showing how the proposed projects are getting us with our goals for the corridors and equity and freight movement. We've had testimony about the industrial lands, and we've put a lot of priority on maximizing the efficiency of these properties, so I'd like to see how that links up. And some more discussion about how the criteria we have work together, because I do agree with the testimony that we do need these jobs to further the equity and to give people other options to stay in their neighborhood, because if they make more money, I think they have more ability to stay there. So I'm interested in that. Want to make sure that the comments we've heard about housing issue get passed on to the Housing Bureau, and I'm sure we'll discuss that. To what extent those issues can be addressed in the comp plan. Talk about how we can do that, and maybe tee up for the city council things that still need to be addressed but really don't get handled here. And while I'm sure this isn't popular, I would be curious about a couple of things. One being, are there places where we've looked at local improvement districts and the ability to get dollars that way? We've heard stuff about TriMet not being given full responsibility for transit. My understanding was Metro does the regional transportation plan, TriMet implements it. So TriMet's not just sort of going off doing what they want. So I think, making sure everybody understands that relationship. To the extent we've got projects in the plan that are run by other agencies, but that would require our partnership, I'm curious how that deals with the budget issue. If we would have to do a match, have we made some assumptions about, well, we need to match, but we could contribute property or right-of-way, and that would get valued, and so it's not really dollars. So those are the types of things I'm curious about.
Chris?
So I'm going to read the suggested policy language on anti-displacement measures with great interest, and suspect we'll want to talk about that at a future work session. The hierarchy is going to be a key point for us to talk about. I am, I think, basically in agreement that sticking goods movement in the middle of a people movement hierarchy doesn't make a lot of sense from a policy point of view. But equally, I don't believe that we're going to have a lot of truck streets where we don't accommodate other modes. So I think we'll want to talk about that. I did want to go back to the comment that some of the community members did not have access to the scoring for the project list. When will that be available?
Our plan, as it's current, so some of the TEG members, we have offered the opportunity for them to come and review those scorings individually. Our plan was to incorporate this round of feedback to modify scoring, include the community support and opposition score, and then release the scoring. So we wanted to have a round of feedback. So our plan was that would be showing all that in around April. So mostly we wanted to make sure we got a full round of feedback on it before we released it.
So I'll come back to that in a second on another heading. I know Maggie's going to ask the EPAP true-up question, so I'll let
but I guess,
that.
So I guess one final note, I think there's options that we can approach that, so that's something we can talk about.
Yeah, I would say sooner is better, so even if it's not fully complete.
Right.
It didn't really come up tonight, which surprised me a little bit, but I will want to talk about the CRC's role in the TSP and the idea of breaking that up into a series of smaller projects that make a lot more sense to really address the problems that the CRC was trying to get at. And I have individual projects that I want to have considered by staff, and I will email those rather than take up time now. So big thing I'm concerned about is the pacing question that I asked at the beginning. And I guess I'd like to suggest to the commission that we allow roughly another 30 days for written comments in order that people can really look at the project list and the scoring criteria and a lot of the detail behind this, because I think it has been a very fast process and a difficult one for the public to follow. So I'm open to the specific date to get advice from staff on what that would be, but roughly another month to let the public comment.
Before we do that, would just clarify are you talking the complete plan or just TSP?
Well, if we're going to leave it open for the TSP, I'd say we should leave it open for everything, right?
Okay.
We'll just confuse the public more.
We'll discuss that at the end. Oh, go ahead,
sorry, Chris's comment about community support just triggered something for me. I think there was comments about the level of support things had on the MAP app, and we've heard concern before about access to the MAP app as that relates to equity and traditionally underrepresented communities. So I would just want to understand how we're figuring out community support with that consideration.
Teresa?
Okay, just a couple of things. One, to echo Chris's comment about access to the scoring criteria for folks, even if it's just kind of a not perfect, but I think they're going to need some time to think about it, and maybe you'll get some feedback that'll really be helpful. You'll probably get a lot of feedback, but maybe you'll find a nugget in there, so it might be worth it. And then there was also a question about the details of the program lists, the bucketed program lists. So people are looking for specific things. I don't know when those would be ready, but we need to.
Pieces of them are out now, but I think that's also on our immediate to-do list to get more
Okay,
in that.
great. And then just the last thing would be we will look at that displacement language and figure out how to incorporate that. Thanks.
Thanks. Karen? Turn the clock on.
Said the pot to the kettle. Yeah, right. I just wanted to say that I was impressed with the number of people talking about anti-displacement tools tonight. I thought that was a conversation that I would probably think maybe a few years ago you would not have heard. And also there were people speaking to tenant rights, which perhaps wasn't about the TSP, but was certainly about people living in our city who are really not living right. And that is very disturbing to me. There is a bit of a history with the East Portland Action Plan projects with the TSP that maybe other people don't know. There have been lists and lists and lists going back and forth. Mostly through their representative, David Hemston, who was here but had to leave for another meeting. We've collected all of his lists. You guys have been on the emails with all of those lists. The true up on that would be very good if that happened. There are some projects from East Portland Action Plan transportation lists that are located in other projects that are already happening. And there's a long litany of reasons why some of the projects are in and some of the projects are out. But I think just for clarity's sake and maybe transparency's sake, we could use a little bit more information on that. I was looking forward to that tonight, and it didn't happen with David. And I have a number of work items that I'll send to Julie.
Mike?
My mind's eye is focused on that big column of green to the right with freeways. Is there some way we can capture some of that money? Yeah, I want to go back to the multi-objective comment. In the 7 outcomes, there was a reference to climate change, but it seemed to be specifically and solely on reduction of greenhouse gases. And I'm hopeful that what you're saying when you refer to the Climate Action Plan, that it includes climate adaptation and the notion of, and a couple of people, John for one, which I was pleasantly surprised to hear, brought up the issue I raised, which is as much collaboration between BES and PBOT to get those multiple objectives to integrate stormwater management. And I know that has been done, but I fear, especially after the Water Bureau BES fiasco, that there may be a retrenchment within the bureaus to very narrowly focus on their mission, which is the wrong way to go. We need to be integrating the missions of the bureaus. And so I'm hopeful that is part and parcel to what's being recommended. I was really pleased to hear about the small projects. Metro has a regional bond measure to go out and buy mostly large chunks of land. There's some smaller projects as well, but we were able, when Robert Liberty was on the council, to persuade Metro to put in a $44 million, which is a relatively small amount compared to the $227 million bond measure, for a nature neighborhoods grant program. And that has had a really great impact on a lot of neighborhoods within the city. And I think those small projects, a grant program that allows citizen groups, community groups,
Nice.
community groups to to work with the Bureau to do some innovative projects that wouldn't cost that much money. I really like that. I'm going to reiterate what I said before. Not all trails are transportation projects. And I know there's a push on the part of some to take trails out of parks. It's purely a PBOT transportation issue. It's not. Most trails do also serve transportation needs, but there's a need in this region to have trails that provide access to nature that are not, strictly speaking, transportation facilities. And I'm hopeful that PBOT's recognizing that. And I have some other stuff actually relating to the multi-objective stuff. That's what I want to talk to Phil Sellinger, because I saw two contradictory statements. One talking about wanting to have interbureau collaboration, and the next one pointing out that it's not clear how those projects are going to come together. So I want to follow up with him on that.
I have a process question maybe for Eric. So we are working on the trails policy in Chapter 8. So I'm not sure when that's coming back for work session. Is that?
Well, we got direction generally to go work on it, and then it all comes back and start the middle.
Okay. So we're working on that.
And I'm definitely not saying that there shouldn't be as much integration of transportation and bicycle and pedestrian access, but there are some trails that it's not their function.
The language we're working on identifies all that. We're working with parks, BPS, BES,
Right.
transportation on that next set of language.
Thanks.
Maggie?
Thank you. So I guess I'd like to start off, I think I would agree with Chris a bit about it's a little disconcerting, the timeline. I have had a lot of feedback from community members that they didn't even understand how the hearing worked in with, they just haven't had time to wade through the project list. So I might be inclined to extend the deadline for testimony, especially given some of the feedback that we still need, EPAP being one of them. I really appreciated testimony and comment from staff about continuing public involvement, especially which went into transportation plan as well as community involvement. But I want to see that continue and increased, and especially even after hearing a lot of the people that were involved in community engagement, really meeting communities where they are. And I did have a chance to read some of the displacement strategy previously, and I really think Alan Hippolito was correct in that we need to show leadership on this. Housing is one of our biggest issues, and it is tied into transportation, it is tied into environmental justice issues, and it's still really hard for me to segregate and divide a lot of these interrelated issues, and to take and not to focus on displacement when we're talking about transportation. So it may be that in the way I was raised in my community, I wasn't raised to divide these policies and these issues. I think someone brought up interconnection, and I think we really need some leadership on displacement issues around transportation, urban regeneration, and housing. And I would really encourage us to look at this proposal in more detail, and really push to have that as a priority in this plan.
Great. Gary?
Blessedly going last, so I have relatively little value to add. Overall, I think the TSP, I was impressed when I read through the materials, and I think it's been a thoughtful process. I'll be interested in seeing the scoring, as others will, because certainly there's a quantitative component, but then there's a qualitative individual judgment component that's applied too. So I think seeing how that plays out in more detail will be helpful. The funding concerns me, but a budget is just a plan, and it's a very long-term thing. But I think, given history at the way it's played out in transportation funding for the city in the past 15, 20 years, I think I'm right to be a little nervous. And then lastly, and I think this is echoing some of what you said, Chris, I'm supportive of the transportation hierarchy. However, the transition, the implementation of that hierarchy is going to be a very tricky issue. I think that it embeds a lot of intergenerational conflicts, potentially, conflicts in ability and disability. It's very dependent on having a highly functioning transit system. There's also a number of class and economic issues embedded in there, which have to do a lot with the financial cost of transportation versus the time cost of transportation. And so there's just a lot of complexity there. And I think for us to hang together as a community as we go through this implementation over a period of 10 to 20 years, it's going to need to be a very thoughtful process. And I'm not sure how we embed that thoughtful process in the comp plan process, but those are basically my concerns and positive thoughts.
So I've got a number, and I'm going to say the best for last, and I'm going to be kind. Inclusion, I'm going to start there. I think there needs to be more inclusionary process in terms of your outreach to communities of color and low income about this plan. I heard kind of a differential view of that from people of color and others. So I think that need to include what their concerns are and how this plan is going to help them is kind of, and how we do that, not only just for the plan, but for the implementation and continued progress is, I don't see it now, but would look to see how that would work long term. The community benefits tie seems like, how does transportation provide those community benefits to some of the other lower income minority communities? I'm not sure, but I think it's an intriguing idea and would be interested in kind of exploring that in some manner. Vision Zero, and I believe in Vision Zero. I think it's the right thing to do. My concern is PBOT has picked bikeways as part of that Vision Zero, but I think pedestrian would be the priority, and that, putting sidewalks in front of people, whether it's in Southwest or in East County or wherever, first, so they can get to school, they can get to their services and get to transit, seems to me to be the priority there, and just rationale for why you're going with bikeways versus pedestrians, I guess, in that Vision Zero. I don't really have an issue. I just would like to understand the Woodlawn, and this is to Michelle's comment. We have put a lot of emphasis on the economic analysis, and freight has to carry that weight. And so Woodlawn's raising the issue about diesel emissions from the transportation study, but at the same time, we're putting a significant amount of prosperity and jobs and for the communities in there. And so a little bit of explanation about that balance, I guess, and how we're still doing that from that. I'm just kind of going from there. The plan conflict, and I guess this is something back to our earlier conversation. It's not, and really is, I guess, for staff and Eric. The Albina plan that was pointed out and the transportation systems plan has, and I got to pick out my Albina plan and see what the transportation was in it, but I'm going to look to see if what the Albina plan says for transportation and what is in the systems plan, the TSP. And what I'm looking for is this earlier conversation that we had about conflicts. And if the transportation system plan would be the higher priority, or would Albina plan be the higher priority? And it's really an issue for us of how we're going to deal with this issue going long term. Not only here, but we have a multitude of plans. Lastly is the issue, and this ties to not only housing but jobs and prosperity, the issue of streetcar, Southwest Corridor, and Powell Division, and transit. Those are in the TSP long-term projects. They are projects, if built, we're going to go tell people to get money that they're long-term projects. When you look at transit, the transit improvements are, I will say they're significant for East County, but there's no guarantee there as to putting down track. And that track will be there long term. In our commitment to the federal government, we're not telling them it's short term. We're telling them we're going to maintain it and operate it for a significant period of time, mostly this plan duration. To me, it's great that East County will get transit improvements from the transportation systems plan, but that 15-minute bus may disappear when the next downturn comes. The tracks don't. And so I guess I'm looking for a method to make those transit improvements, because that's part of prosperity, getting people to jobs that don't have the resources, reducing their cost of living in the city of Portland, that has the same commitment to the transportation systems plan that includes TriMet, that holds PBOT to making the improvements in that same time frame so that the transportation improvements can occur, and it's all connected. Because otherwise it's a good commitment, but there's nobody holding each other accountable for long term. And so I become concerned about that. And the last thing is how do we maybe leverage, in terms of community benefits, back to community benefits, the streetcar and some of these things that have development opportunities that are truly going to be development opportunities. How do we leverage those to bring benefits potentially to the rest of the city? So tying some development, almost a development agreement that says we're going to take some of that prosperity that comes because of streetcar investment. And yes, that's part of the federal side, but we have to put in a little bit of money too. But there's a huge development, and the economic analysis says it's going to work. I'm not going to disagree with that, and it probably will. But how do we take part of that benefit and move it across? And I know that's in some of the TIF districts, but some of that benefit is public money not coming from the TIF district that goes in. So we ought to be able to take some of that benefit back out of that TIF district, and just thinking through that.
So beyond the immediate geography, but broader.
Broader issue, yeah, because part of the money going in is not TIF restricted.
Could I go back to one of the items you mentioned, the understanding the Woodlawn concerns with diesel emissions? Could you talk a little bit more about what you're looking for from us with regard to feedback?
Well, they were concerned about the increased truck traffic. We have, in our economic EOA, said that we want we have to rely on freight to get the prosperity to the jobs. I mean, that's part of what we have to do. But I'm concerned that if that freight is bringing a health concern, which is the other part of one of the circles, are we really connecting the dots? I mean, when we getting a benefit, but also causing harm.
So just to connect with dots, I think that goes to some of the issues we're seeing with California's cleaner truck standards resulting in the vehicle fleet being dumped in Oregon. And, can we balance that out?
That enough direction?
Yes. That was a lot of direction.
We'll be back in December.
Yeah. And now we need to talk to Eric about. hold on.
No, I was just going to say, if the freight's moving more smoothly, then they're idling less. So you might actually get some benefit, right? And I'm not just making this up. Logically, it seems to me that it's not necessarily.
It'd be good to
we
hear
need to
that
look
that
at
is. It'd
Right.
be good to look at that, and if that's the case, from the intelligent systems that they're talking about.
Great. Well, we'll got some homework to do. We'll see you again on March 10th.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Really?
Speaking of fast turnaround.
We're good. I would also add that there are health benefits to having a job too. So.
Yeah. So let's talk about the idea of extensions in terms of written testimony. Just any other comments on that idea that Chris has put forth?
So I'd like to hear if there was any implications to extending the written testimony for 30 days.
Well, you would be on a clear track to not meeting the state deadlines. I mean, that's the simplest way to put it.
Could you tell us more about that?
Well, there's a state requirement that you complete the work plan, that the city completed its periodic review work plan by July 31st of this year. So an extension puts us beyond the point of being able to meet that.
What's the consequence for that?
The state has a number of remedies. It usually takes them a few months to implement those, so the immediate consequence is probably nothing. Ultimately, they do have the power to remove transportation funding or other funding or grant funding from the city if we fail to meet the deadline. But again,
Have we gotten so far?
we've used up the allowed extensions.
So we're asking for.
We entered into periodic review in 2008. And so it was discussed earlier, that there hasn't been a TSP update since 2007, and that's because we've been in this process since then. So it's just perspective on where we are.
So,
I know what it's like to not meet your deadlines with the state.
So hold on. Joe, did you want to insert here? Other comments?
Well, so how does it impact our work session schedule?
Well, so the next work session is March 10th, and that was to have a work session to absorb what you heard tonight on the TSP, but then also the other part of it is the housing and residential densities piece. It doesn't so much affect your work session schedule, it affects the staff's ability to close the loop and finish reporting out on the public testimony. So it would add work sessions in the future that would, because we would need to bring you the final testimony, and we can't do that until a later date. So it would add work sessions probably in May and push your vote into the summer probably, keeping in mind that you also have other items on your agenda and other projects teed up behind you. So it would have an effect on other projects too.
And we have a hearing on the EOA where people could testify on anything at that point, correct, too? And that's in April 14th.
You have two hearings in April. You have the EOA hearing, which is about the employment strategy, and then you have a scenarios report hearing, which is about how does this whole plan perform. So those two hearings do provide some opportunity, like tonight, to comment, but they are on particular aspects of the plan. They're not general purpose hearings.
But people could testify on the TSP at that time if they wanted to, as they did tonight on
especially, housing. Both the economic opportunities analysis, certainly testimony about whether the transportation system plan supports that that's fair game. And on the SNARES report, it's about the performance of the whole system, and certainly the transportation system is part of that. So
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, Joe?
So ideally, if the commission really feels the need for an additional period of testimony, we should, the best way to do it is to do that, because even these moments in the future that Eric's talking about, if the testimony comes up, we still have to process it.
Yeah.
And processing is not just putting it in a folder, it's actually deliberating through, does it change the plan at all? Because then you need to change the runs that you're actually evaluating it on to the extent that it's significant. So if that closer look by more people of all the list of projects is significant, we should just make some more time for it. We're in trouble with the state. I'm not sure. Like, I want to talk with Eric tomorrow about really thinking that through, but that's, I think that's preferable than thinking we're going to sneak it in later, because really, you want to do it right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's do it or not. That's one observation. I agree, with Eric's observation of what it does to, or at least our state deadline and the vulnerability there. You heard a lot of testimony from organizations tonight who have plowed through the list, which was one thing that kept reassuring me, although I know specifically from folks who would like more time to do it. The other thing to keep in mind is, when's the next of these updates?
Prior to the 2018 RTP. So it's a couple of years out, we're going to be doing this round again.
Right.
But
So
everybody can comment on before the city council.
yeah,
It's
well,
all
that's
open, wide
absolutely
open for
true.
the city
We got
council.
this whole sort of process going on again at city council, and we need to sort of build it in the same sort of way. Changes that happen there, we're going to have to run through the evaluation model to make it still sure it's still good.
So this is where I'm definitely out of my league, but I do have a comment or suggestion. So as I understand it, what we need to meet the state guidelines is a constrained project list. So out of all the things we were talking about, where things fit in the 1 through 5, 5 through 10, or how things fit into the programs, what we need is a list in the current status of the conversation to meet the state guidelines. That's different than us getting to the final finish line of refining and tweaking all of the TSP elements that we're going to be taking on also in Task 5. So there may be a way that we can provide a list that complies with the overall statewide goals, allows us to proceed, while we continue doing a lot more refinement and diligence rather than getting that 100% done at the same time as meeting the statewide guidelines. I don't know the details enough there to know how all those pieces might come
Well,
together.
what you're alluding to is that there is a whole nother wave of comprehensive plan work that you're going to have in terms of hearings, the Task 5 work, which is the implementing phase, and that sort of is it starts to get into implementing details, and there is a TSP element of that work plan. So there is the ability to resolve unresolved issues in the TSP at that stage,
for instance,
accepting an interim list now for purposes of the initial proposal.
Is it possible that, Eric, you can get with Joe and look at this and get back to us? We'll be back March 10th. The testimony's still open written-wise, and then at that point, looking at what PBOT has, you're putting out as much as you can, as fast as you can to the public, correct? Between now and then? And seeing what we have in front of us, and then on March 10th, I just would like to table this until March 10th. We'll come back and look, we've got 3 days, it's still open, and then if we want to extend it, I want to understand how long we would, potentially want to extend it.
One potential
And-
legal issue I want to bring up is the record. You have to extend or close the record on a night when there's a public hearing. So if you want to make that decision next time, you have to have a public hearing to do it.
Oh.
Or it has to be tonight. You can't make
Okay.
a decision. Otherwise, we have to re-notify people
Re-notify
of what's
people.
happening, and that would be
So-
fairly expensive.
Can we just extend it for the TSP, or do we have to extend it for the comp plan?
I think they're so intertwined from a land use perspective, it may not be worth trying to parse that difference. If you're going to extend it, you might as well extend it, because we will be stuck with we can't close the land use piece until the TSP piece is closed. They're connected.
Final comments, and then we'll kind of get a nod of heads.
Could it be less than 30 days, the extension, like 20 days or 19 or something that would help kind of bridge that gap?
Well, it seemed to me the hearing on the 14th would be the logical deadline.
Other comments?
For me, the happy medium would be, again, so if it's going to go to city council as well, there's going to be hearing at city council. City council can still update and you can still remodel. If we're still rushing to meet a state deadline, it seems like another opportunity for people to come in if there's just a big push on our ends, a big push on community members to really get people to evaluate the updated documents.
Joe.
You know, if I could, that's a good observation because we're seeing it now in the West Quadrant plan because we're taking 80 amendments back in 2 weeks.
It's been extended again.
So we know it gets redeliberated at City Council. And so the thing to keep in mind, and I can't judge for you, is projects that are in this list that are big enough deal that they're going to affect our overall sort of direction and modeling and policy, what we're actually sort of setting in place with a comprehensive plan. That's one thing. Projects that we may have evaluated wrong and they should be moved up because of local benefit and interest are absolutely going to be resonant at City Council. The blessing for us, the lucky, it'd be great to know about those sooner than later because when we get to City Council, we're going to need to process them really quickly too to be able to provide feedback back to City Council that there's no problem or it's good or okay and here are the implications. But that is another opportunity for those. Something that comes in that's like get rid of CRC or I don't even know what is that big that it makes a difference at the scale we're at now. It'd be great to know now, but the neighborhood ones I believe we have more time with.
Based on the feedback we heard tonight, the main to-do items to meet what you need for periodic review were the ones that are on the unconstrained list that community members or other interests feel like they need to be moved on. That's the most immediate.
Or the reverse.
Or the reverse. You're right. Yes. But that's the main cut line that really needs to be solidified in the most immediate term. There's a lot more work as we get into the details.
Okay.
I have just one more question. So I think a lot of feedback we heard tonight too, especially from the Stop Displacement crew, was having in place community benefit agreements and other displacement policies prior to this to closing out the TSP, but that's 2 weeks. So
that's the implementation phase of the whole planning process. Is that none of it goes into effect until we've got those implementation pieces.
Okay.
Well, and with the brief that the Displacement Coalition gave us tonight, the discussion of what the heck benefits agreement might mean and how it applies, that's clearly on the table right now for your all's discussion at the policy level. And then if we want to try to do something, we could try to bring something back in the implementing code level. But mostly, those might not even be codes we're adopting. They sound like contracting things more than zoning.
And we are teeing up a conversation as the other part of your work session on the 10th was intended to be about housing, and that's certainly on topic for that. So we know we're going to be rolling up our sleeves on that issue on the March 10th work session.
Michelle?
And I think that if we move forward and we go ahead and close the public hearing at this point, we could still give staff direction to pay particular attention to outreach to these groups in the interim so that we don't just say, okay, we're extending it 30 days and that really doesn't accomplish much. I think we may actually get more bang for the buck by moving things along and just saying, okay, specifically we heard from these groups that their concerns, can we make sure that there's targeted outreach going into City Council?
Another potential middle ground is that, and I'll look to Chris to see if he feels like this is useful or not, but the tag looks like they want to have an ongoing discussion of some of these issues, and short of taking public testimony, you can ask the tag questions in your follow-up work sessions, even if it's not a hearing. So that might be a way to get perspectives from the community beyond the the deadline if you focus that effort on the advisory committee that's working on that issue.
Okay. I guess I'm persuaded that between council adoption and the Task 5 activities, there'll be opportunity for input. So
I
withdraw the request.
I just want to make the point, though, we have 2 hearings, April 14th and April 28th, that people can come and make TSP comments, and if they're significant, staff is going to have to go back, and if we raise those comments at the end of the hearing, staff will have to go back and do the same thing as if we extended the hearing. So I think we can achieve the same maybe outcome by just being attentive during those 2 hearings and encouraging EPAP or whatever, if they have TSP concerns, to come and participate in those hearings at that time, too.
So we want to advertise that opportunity, essentially?
No, I'm not advertising that. I'm just saying it's a slippery. It's an opportunity to, as tonight with the housing, which I thought was very impactful and very useful, provide good testimony, and it's causing us to think about housing before we've even got there. And again, the same thing, we're going to be we'll be past the TSB, but it may cause us to go back and rethink some things. And we always have that opportunity in the comp plan process anyway. So if we're okay, we'll just stick with our current plan, and we'll.
A lot of the information we can bring you on the 10th, I think, will help answer a lot of the questions. So I think a lot of the focus of the questions around where people are, like EPAP, are concerned about a lost project, those are within the program lists. So if we, help bring those program lists forward, I think that most of the lost and founds are found there.
Yep. I would encourage as much as you can get out publicly before we have the March 10th.
Yeah, we're got some work to do.
Yeah. Any other last comments? No? We are adjourned. Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, I'll see you in